I'll call the City Council meeting for July 14th, 2009 to order. May we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that all members of council are present.
Okay. Do we have a closed session report?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. The council met in closed session to discuss the matters that are reflected on the open session agenda. There is reportable action as to one matter, the Newport Coast Recovery versus the City of Newport Beach. The City Council voted 6-0. Councilmember Brzezinski not present to defend, authorize the Office of City Attorney to defend through the use of Richards, Watson, Gershon, our outside counsel in that matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilmember Henn, followed by the invocation by our City Manager, Homer Bludell.
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us bow our heads in a prayerful attitude. O great and compassionate God, we wish to give thanks for the blessings you have bestowed on us both individually and as a community. You have provided this community with an abundance of beautiful scenery and wonderful people, and it is sometimes the beauty of this community that gives rise to debate as to whether changes should take place. We ask your wisdom and guidance be granted to our City Council, our staff, and the meeting participants as we discuss and deliberate issues of importance. Let us be mindful that differences of opinion are beneficial in seeking the truth, and let us conduct ourselves with respect for all with whom we are dealing, for we know that we do so within your loving sight. In addition, we ask your blessings on Mayor Ed and Lynn Selich as they begin their wedded union together. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Homer. Okay, we have a number of presentations tonight. First one is AYSO 57, presentation of the Mayor's Cup Trophy.
Good evening. I'm Phillip Greenberg from AYSO Region 57, 3038 Carib Street, Newport Beach. Every year there are about 5,000 kids that play soccer locally between the cities of Costa Mesa and Newport Beach. There are 3 regions, and we have about 500 games every week. And at the end of the year, the league winners have a tournament of the U10s, or the under 10-year-olds, under 12-year-olds, under 14-year-olds. And the winning region gets this trophy. It's a perpetual trophy, the Mayor's Cup. Last year, it was shared by Region 97. Had to share it between the 2 mayors since they represent both cities. This year, however, my last year as regional commissioner, I get the honor of presenting this to you for Region 57, the Corona del Mar, Balboa Island, and Newport Coast region. We won the tournament fairly handily, and we get to present this to you for keeping here at City Hall.
Great, happy you did that.
Thank you.
Okay, our next presentation is a proclamation recognizing July as Parks and Recreation Month. Is Marie Marston here? Okay, I'm going to read this proclamation. Whereas Parks and Recreation creates community through people, parks, and programs, and Parks and Recreation makes lives and communities better now and into the future, and parks help to preserve and protect the natural and cultural resources in our communities and provide access to the serenity and the inspirations of nature, and Parks and Recreation services support more productive workforces enhance the desirability of locations for business and families, and stimulate tourism revenues to increase a total community development model. In parks and recreation facilities, community problem-solving, and strengthens community image, sense of place, and increases cultural unity. In parks and recreation, promotes health and wellness and reduces health care costs. And parks and recreation fosters human development, helping young people develop and grow into healthy adults, and helping adults continue to live longer through lifelong learning. And parks and recreation strengthens community safety and security by offering positive alternatives for youth, which reduces juvenile crime. And thousands of Newport Beach children, adults, and seniors benefit from the wide range of services, facilities, and programs provided by the City of Newport Beach Department of Recreation and Senior Services and General Services. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Edward Selich, Mayor of the City of Newport Beach, do hereby proclaim July as Parks and Recreation Month and encourage all residents to enjoy and recognize the social, physical, mental, economic, environmental, and community benefits derived from our programs, which provide something of value to everyone. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Newport Beach to be affixed this 14th day of July, 2009. Edward Selich, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Selich. It's an honor to serve as chair on the Parks, Beaches, and Recreation Commission.
Okay, and our final proclamation tonight is for the Corona Del Mar Library, 50th anniversary. Our librarian is here with us this evening. Whereas the Corona Del Mar branch has a long history of community support beginning over 50 years ago when property and funds to build the library were donated by generous citizens of Newport Beach who valued reading, literacy, and cultural arts. And the Corona Del Mar Branch Library was built at 420 Marigold Avenue and dedicated 50 years ago on July 28, 1959, to provide our community with the educational, informational, and cultural resources to live, learn, work, and thrive together and as individuals. And the Corona Del Mar Branch Library continues to serve the community with reading materials, computers, access to online resources, story times, and special programs. And for 50 years, the Corona Del Mar Branch Library has functioned as an important part of our community, providing a gathering spot for cultural activities, special events and programs. And in times of economic prosperity or instability, the library is a place for everyone to find free access to opportunity, education, self-help, and lifelong learning. Now therefore, I, Edward Selich, Mayor of Newport Beach, on behalf of the entire Newport Beach City Council, do hereby ask that all citizens join us in celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Corona Del Mar Branch Library and its continued service to the community. I encourage all citizens to take advantage of the wonderful resources available at the Newport Beach Public Library, to visit it often, both in person and online. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Newport Beach to be affixed this 14th day of July, 2009. Edward Selich, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
We want to thank you because you have been so helpful with the Corona Del Mar branch, and we really appreciate your support in this revamping and reviving of the branch.
Okay, Madam Clerk.
Notice to the public. The city provides a yellow sign-in card to assist in the preparation of the minutes. The completion of the card is not required in order to address the council. Speakers must limit comments to 5 minutes on agenda items. The council has a discretion to extend or shorten the time limit on agenda or non-agenda items. As a courtesy, please turn cell phones and pagers off or set them in the silent mode. Now is the time for council announcements or matters which council members would like placed on a future agenda for discussion, action, or report.
Okay. Normally, I go last at this point in the meeting, but I plan to go first right now because Councilman Webb continues to upstage me by announcing my announcements for me. And however, that didn't work out because the city manager did it in the invocation, and that is that I have a very important announcement, and that was that last Saturday I was married to Lynn Hackman. It was a joyous occasion, and I have a few pictures to show. Not that I'm proud or anything. This is the church at Heliotrope, the Congregational Church where we were married. Next.
Take a second here. There we go.
There we are walking down the aisle. It's my beautiful bride. We had the reception at the Corinthian Yacht Club. We went on a little harbor cruise before the reception. Obviously happy. Next. Had a little escort coming back to the reception, courtesy of the Harbor Patrol. Here we are coming back into the dock. That's the family that was at the wedding ceremony. There we are coming up the ramp to the reception. Had to give a little toast with a special bottle of champagne. Had to cut the cake. That's our first dance. It was a beautiful sunset, perfect time for it. Then we got into a little bit more lively dancing.
A little bit. He's still sore today.
And as you can see, most people there, I think everybody had a pretty good time, enthusiastic crowd. And there's the end of a perfect day. Councilwoman Daigle.
Yes. Well, in our efforts to keep that harbor dredge that you're on the boat on, I wanted to report that to our citizens that the President's request for $1.78 million is holding up well through the congressional process. And most recently, the Senate Appropriations Committee on Water and Energy approved that same amount. And so what that means is that the Corps of Engineers is going to be able to perform hydro studies and engineering specs and environmental documents during the next 12 months to try to make a project shovel-ready. And certainly at the city, we're pursuing a total system solution where we will be completing the back bay. We have all the funding in place and then move towards the initiation of a harbor dredging project. So we're very pleased at the ongoing federal assistance and support that we are receiving. So thank you.
Councilwoman Gardner.
Yes. Orange Coast River Park, we have a memorandum of agreement signed by the cities of Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, and Costa Mesa. The county, which is a vital part of the park, has also, we had hoped to be a part of the agreement, but they have had it for several years and been unable to sign it for some reason. So at a meeting of the cities and the county, it was agreed that since the cities had signed the agreement, that we would like to meet and start to pursue some of the aims of that agreement, that understanding. And so I'd like to have a brief study session so the council can give direction as to how they wanted us to pursue it, whether through staff or through one of us, perhaps.
Okay, Councilman Webb.
You know, Mr. Selich does try to upstage me all the time, and some of his pictures answered some questions I had for last Saturday night, because that was my 70th birthday, and I was going to thank you for putting on such a wonderful party, but I was confused why you didn't have any candles on the cake, and you didn't share this toast with me on my birthday, but I guess it was because you got married. Congratulations.
Councilman Henn.
Yes, I'd like to thank the Newport Beach Police Department for helping us survive another 4th of July on Balboa Peninsula. We had only about 120 arrests that day, which wasn't a lot different than the year before. But I did, and I'm sincere about that, by the way, the thanks for the police department and the rest of the city staff for how well they did manage that event. The issue that I wanted to raise for everyone's benefit, though, is that we've had about 4 or 5 years now of pretty much the same approach to containing the revelry on the peninsula. And Councilman Rosansky and I are on a 4th of July committee here for the council, and we've concluded that we're going to have a post-4th of July assessment this year that will be happening sometime soon, where we can really sit back and perhaps take out a clean sheet of paper and try to decide whether or not there's a way to take us to another level yet. Things are a lot better than they used to be 5 or 6 years ago, but if you're a resident of West Newport, it may not feel like it. And so we're going to have another look at all of this and see if there's a way to make it better, to get another increment of improvement for how we control the 4th of July. That does cost the city in excess of $150,000 every year out of its general fund. So we're going to have a look at that, and hopefully we'll figure out some ways to make some improvement.
Councilman Rosansky.
Nothing, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Curry.
Well, on the 4th of July, it was my pleasure, along with Councilmember Daigle, to participate in the Mariners Park annual parade and festival at Mariners Park. It's a big fundraiser for Mariners School, and once again, we had literally, I think, thousands of kids there to enjoy the 4th of July. It was particularly appropriate this year that the Grand Marshal of the parade was our own Homer Bludow, in recognition of his 10 years of service with the city, and justly deserved. And I'd also like to give a real kudos to our Administrative Services Department, and particularly to Dennis Danner, because this year the Government Finance Officers Association once again has given Newport the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for our comprehensive annual financial report. The GFOA said, and I'm quoting, "The CAFR has been judged by an impartial panel to meet the high standards of the program, including demonstrating a constructive spirit of full disclosure to clearly communicate its financial story and motivate users and user groups to read the annual financial report." So this is an award that Newport has traditionally won year in and year out in recognition of our efforts for financial transparency and good reporting here in the city, and staff is once again to be congratulated.
Okay, and I have one additional announcement also relating to the 4th of July. I had the honor of serving as Grand Marshal of the American Legion 4th of July Boat Parade. It was an inspirational event with all these boats decorated up, and 4th of July regalia. The American Legion hosted a number of Marines who bravely have been serving our country. As the Grand Marshal, I was on the front of the boat, and I was really excited because every time we would go by a group of people, they were applauding and cheering, but then I realized they were cheering for the Marines and not me, but that was okay, too. It was a great time. Madam Clerk.
Consent calendar. All matters listed under consent calendar, items 1 through 22, and noting the continuance of item 22 to the July 28th meeting, are considered by the council to be routine and will all be enacted by one motion in the form listed below. The city council members have received detailed staff reports on each of the items recommending an action. There will be no separate discussion of these items prior to the time the council votes on the motion unless members of the council, staff, or the public request specific items to be discussed and/or removed from the consent calendar for separate action. Members of the public who wish to discuss a consent calendar item should come forward to the lectern upon an invitation by the mayor and state their name and item number. If the optional sign-in card has been completed, it should be placed in the box provided at the podium.
Okay, Councilman Henn.
Nothing to pull, but two quick comments on item number 15 on tsunami sirens. I'm pleased to see that that project is, in fact, moving ahead, and it's good to see that there's real progress there toward that goal. With regard to item number 16, which is the project approving a CEQA consulting contract for the confined aquatic disposal site in Newport Harbor. I did have a conversation with Dave Kiff a little earlier today, and I wanted to make clear that he confirmed that the scope of that assignment will include a careful evaluation of all of the potential CAD sites in the harbor and an evaluation of why the consultant believes that any particular site is the one best site to select, as well as an outreach program to explain to affected shoreline residents that decision process and give them an opportunity to weigh in on the decision before it's made. So I wanted to make it real clear that all of that is included within the scope of that contract that we're being asked to approve.
Okay. Councilman Rosansky?
Nothing, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Curry?
No items to pull?
Councilman Daigle?
Yes, I just wanted to comment on number 9. That's completion of work for our first phase of our traffic signal synchronization program, and we're now in phases 2 and 3, so that's progress. And then on item 16, I just wanted to add to that, as far as the environmental documentation, that there be alternatives looked at vis-a-vis other locations as well as other methods, and particularly if this cement-based stabilization could also be looked at as well.
Okay. Councilman Gardner?
Just some notes that on number 1, the minutes, on page 199, number 17, where it says that I express support for the Restaurant Association, asked staff to address the issues. I actually asked the association to address the issues, so if that correction be made. And then I recorded a no vote on number 3.
Okay. Councilman Webb?
None.
Okay. And I have nothing. Does staff have anything to pull?
No items.
Okay. Does anyone from the public want to pull any item from the consent calendar? Okay. Seeing no one, I'll bring it back for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I would move the consent calendar items 1 through 22 with the continuance of item 22 until July 28th, and noting the correction to the minutes and Councilmember Gardner's no vote on item 3.
Second.
Okay. Please vote.
Motion carries.
Okay. We're now going to move to item number 23 on the agenda. That's public hearings. This is a public hearing that was set for a time certain, 7:20 p.m. This is the AERIE project, 201 to 205 and 207 Carnation Avenue and 101 Bayside Place. It's a general plan amendment, coastal land use plan amendment, code amendment, tract map, modification permit, coastal residential development permit, and environmental impact report. What I'd like to do this evening is follow the following procedure at the concurrence of the council, is to have the staff give any comments that they have, allow the applicant to make some opening remarks. There is a representative of the organized opposition. Give that representative 15 minutes to make his remarks. At that time, I'd like to give the applicant an opportunity to rebut those remarks, then open it to general public comment, limiting those comments to 3 minutes each.
I'd like to make a change to that, just a suggestion, because we know in public comment you get one bite at the apple. And if after the applicant and the opposition, the applicants have had their say, that we have a brief discussion at the council level highlighting some of our issues so that they don't come up after public comments and people feel they haven't had a chance to comment on some of those issues. Just a suggestion.
You're suggesting what, that that we have discussion before the applicant gets up again?
Either that might be good, just to answer some of those questions. But I just thought that with public comment, that if they comment before we start to discuss things, there may be issues that come up in our course of our discussion that they would want to comment on, but then they've already been here and they don't get to come twice.
Okay, well, we get to comment after the applicant when he makes his presentation.
Well, you had suggested that we would go right into public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You just assumed. Okay, I'm sorry.
I just assumed we were
All right.
going to discuss
Okay.
it.
Thank you.
And then, but I think the important thing is for the people in the audience that when you get to come up and comment, your time period is 3 minutes this evening. So try and watch the little box on the podium, and the yellow light comes on when you have a minute left, and your time's up when the red light comes on. So with that, we'll go ahead and ask the staff to make any remarks they care to make at this time.
Principal Planner Jim Campbell will provide the staff report.
Mayor and members of the council, just make some brief introductory remarks, and we'll move on to the applicant's presentation of the project itself. But I wanted to just kind of highlight the various applications before the council this evening. We do have a general plan amendment, a coastal land use plan amendment, and a code amendment to change the zoning of a very small portion of the project site. It's 584 square feet. from two-family to multiple family, which is really the designations of the bulk of the site. It's about a 1.4-acre site at the intersection of Ocean Boulevard and Carnation, right on the bluff above the harbor. A good portion of that site is actually submerged lands, and it's also obviously the coastal bluff slope. Now, we've got a tentative tract map which would subdivide this property into 8 airspace condominium units. It also recombined the parcels. There's an adjacent parcel on Carnation, the 201 Carnation property, and this 584 square foot portion of 101 Bayside Place that would be combined. We have a modification permit for encroachments of the project into setbacks, and the front setback along Carnation, and there's a setback along to the adjacent property at 215 Carnation, as well as along the back of the property where we have some balconies that exceed the maximum height limit there. Most of those encroachments in the front side yard are below grade. We have a coastal residential development permit, and that's a permit here locally that we do to evaluate whether the project is eliminating affordable units in accordance with the Mello Act. We don't have any affordable units that we're aware of in this project site, so there's no replacement requirement there. Now, this project has come before the Planning Commission several times, Council, and this will be the third time here. And at the last, in 2007, the City Council did review this project as it related to the predominant line of existing development. This was in 2007. And I think the key item there was that the Council did evaluate the project, where the project would fall in relation to the surrounding and existing development. It took a strong look at the coastal land use plan policies related to that and established the predominant line of development at 50.7 feet, which is horizontal contour, if you will. At the time, the project was well below that, and so it necessitated a redesign. The project came back, that redesigned project came back last year, about 1 year ago. Council had some concerns about the visual impacts and other concerns, and so at that point in time, we decided, hey, we need to do an environmental impact report. Now, since that meeting, we've gone ahead and prepared that environmental impact report, and it was transmitted to you previously for your review and consideration. Now, within that, we did an extensive view analysis, and the conclusion was that it would not significantly impact the views. It also includes the visual impact of the project on the bluff face as viewed from the west. You know, again, the predominant line of development is principally there to preserve the public views of the bluff itself, you know, as a visual resource. And, you know, there are aspects of the project that go below that, and those are subterranean. There is one exception to that. There is a little cut-through for an emergency exit and dock access exit, which you know, is being screened from public view. So we felt that that was consistent with the policies of the coastal land use plan. Now, with the EIR, we did identify one environmental impact, and that was noise, construction-related noise. And that was really as a result of the duration of the construction, the proximity to sensitive residential uses, and the intensity of noise, principally devoted to the demolition and the excavation activities. So that was really the one significant environmental effect that we couldn't mitigate. We then proceeded into looking at alternatives to the project, and there are several alternatives that are within the EIR, all really geared towards reducing that noise impact, and really the only variable that we could address was the duration of noise. In order to do that, really, it was a function of reducing the excavation. And that had a variety of different impacts. Losing one or more of the subterranean levels was really how those variants, those alternatives came about. Now, ultimately, all of this information was presented to the Planning Commission as well as the Harbor Commission. And I'll get to the Harbor Commission first. The Harbor Commission reviewed the project back in April of this year, and they had a negative recommendation. They felt that the docks, and again, they were looking only at the docks, that the docks would protrude too far out into the harbor and would be an impact to navigation. Since that time, a subcommittee of harbor commissioners actually went out to the site and took a look at it, reported back to the Harbor Commission, and at their meeting last week, they've done a reversal. They don't believe that it is an impact to navigation. Now, the Harbor Commission was just providing input to the Harbor Resources Manager, planning staff, and yourself. And all of that kind of really relates back to the EIR that's before you this evening. And the actual dock permit itself is really not here before the council tonight. The jurisdiction for that is actually the Harbor Resources Manager, and he can only act on that after the environmental impact report is certified, should the council choose to make that finding here this evening. So with that, the Harbor Commission's information is within the supplementary report that I provided for you, and if there's any questions, I can try to address those. Back to the Planning Commission. Last month, the Planning Commission reviewed the project. They did make a recommendation to approve the project as it stands, given the significant impact to noise. They felt that the project benefits would outweigh those impacts, and they're recommending a statement of overriding considerations. And that's pretty much my remarks. Again, the Planning Commission and staff recommend project approval. I think we have some additional remarks that staff might make from the City Attorney's Office, but did you want to go now, or? Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to the applicant to present the project a little more in detail, and then we can initiate any questions and answers from the applicant or myself.
Yeah, let's see if there's any questions from the council for Mr. Campbell. Any questions for Mr. Campbell? Okay.
Okay.
Mayor Selich and members of the council, my name is Rick Julian. My wife Karen and I are the applicants. We're happy to be back before you here tonight. It's been a year since we last met. We feel strongly that AERIE has tremendous benefits for the neighborhood. We're committed to make our neighborhood better because of AERIE. AERIE has many in our neighborhood who really support the project. They've been attending many planning commission meetings as well as your 2 city council meetings, and many of them are here again tonight. And in respect of your time, is it possible I just ask for a show of hands instead of having them come up to show any support? Yes. So those in favor, could you just simply hold your hands up? AERIE has been designed to provide many important long-term benefits to the neighborhood that should make the short-term discomfort worthwhile. We hope that you will approve of AERIE tonight so that we can move on with this beautiful project. Brian Jeanette is here to show you all the details, and we have engineers and soils engineers and consultants if there's any questions you have for them. Thank you for hearing us again.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Julian.
Again, Mr. Mayor, congratulations.
Thank you.
And members of the council, my name is Brian Jeanette. With me tonight is Wunsi Lee, my colleague at the office. And what I'd like to do is take you through the briefing book with a little bit more detail in some areas. The briefing book is what I sent out to staff as well as council members earlier on, so that it was an opportunity for me to at least put and condense some of the information that we have within the project so that it would prompt questions, which it did. And so what I'd like to do is take you on a little tour. If Mike could, Mr. Councilman Henn could hit the lights. One second. Jim kind of touched on the history, I think, quite adaptly, and what I'd like to do is kind of cover it a little bit better. A little quicker, that is. Next slide. We originally began with a 9-unit project. It was larger, and it's been now reduced through the process that we've gone through. Reduced because we've listened to the commission, to the council, to the neighbors, and to the staff. The project's now roughly 20% less than it was before with an 8-unit situation that we're presenting. This is the project that the Planning Commission reviewed and approved as well. And with this became the need to create the documents to support the EIR. Next slide. We've been through 11. Tonight is the 12th hearing that we've been through in the process. And I think each time looking at different issues and respecting them even more. Next slide. This is the project as it stands today, and this is the project as it stands with the AERIE project completed. What you'll see tonight are a few of the visual simulations at different levels, but I don't have all of them tonight, but they are all in the EIR. If you would like to see those, we can point to those. So at the last hearing of the City Council, these were the bullet points that I believe we walked away from with the council asking for additional information on. One concerning the aesthetics of the project, and you'll see some visual simulations that address that, of which through the EIR process found that there were no significant impacts. The biological resources, as we get into those, I'll just explain things we were looking at there, and they also found no significant impact. Noise, traffic, and air quality, linked together to kind of give me the opportunity to create a very detailed construction management plan, and I'll touch on that slightly too. But of the three, the noise was the only significant impact, and again, that was a short-term construction noise. And then the final issue was the soils and geology, and it was found also to have no significant impact, and I will move into those areas with a little bit more detail. Concerning the aesthetics, 20 view simulations were generated by the city's consultant, and we looked at views from the bay, not only from a large boat, but also from a kayak level. We also looked at views from Begonia Park and Pacific Drive, and then bay views from the beaches down on the bay areas as well as from the peninsula. And then obviously it was important to address the size of the building from ocean. And again, it's significant to point that these were all less than significant. Next. So what you have here is the existing, the before look of the project and the after look of the project. And this includes the loaded docks with the boats in it. Interestingly enough, which was part of my design, I wanted the building to blend into the natural landscaping, which is why it looks dark. It is darker materials that we're utilizing, so that it does mimic the earth below it. Next slide. This is a view looking kind of directly out in front of the docks, unloaded here and loaded in the building the AERIE project designed. Next slide. Important point that was made here was the need to make sure that we kept the visual connection to the cove, that it was not being hampered in any way, as well as maintain the existing rock formation that identifies the cove itself. This is the before and this is the after. The boats out here, again in loaded condition, show that protection of the little peninsula is protected, as well as the protecting of the slope itself. Next slide. This I bring up because one of the issues that we're dealing with through the biological aspect is to clean up the debris that has been left here for many, many years, including storm drain pipes, concrete retaining walls, spilled areas of concrete that were used to buffer the retaining walls above, and debris that was down in these parts of the site. So all of this is going to be eliminated, revegetated, and the portion of the slope that you see on this west elevation will actually be better and more substantially landscaped with native plant material than what you see there today. Next slide. So the biological resources, we were developing programs to remove the foundations, the storm drain pipes, that remove the non-native plant materials, and then re-landscape with appropriate landscape material, and protect the sand dollar habitat that is not a protected species presently that's in the bay. And then also develop the construction techniques to protect eelgrass in the reconstruction and maintenance of the gangway and the dock system. Next slide. And to prove, the distance is a benefit in this case. This is the gangway that exists today, and the dock platform. These are the new dock fingers as they are designed. This is the location of the sand dollar. It's over 100 feet away from it, but we'll be protecting from any debris leaving this area, and which will obviously will have barriers that would protect any access to the sand dollar itself. The eelgrass is also being protected. None of the docks will shadow the eelgrass areas. Next slide. So the noise, traffic, and air quality analysis really prompted the need for the construction management plan. Next. We defined the haul routes, which was reviewed by city staff as well as the commission and accepted. Next slide. The construction noise on a short-term noise is the only avoidable impact. The construction noise through the city municipal code exempts it because it limits its days that you can be doing this kind of construction. Phase 1 and 2 of the project, which is basically the demolition and the early grading parts, will be done only during weekdays. We will not be doing any construction or removal of earth during the weekends, so Saturdays are left for the quietness of the neighborhood. Mitigation conditions were established to minimize the noise using sound blankets and panels, and the building envelope, as it gets built high to the upper levels, will be protecting because it's a 8 to 12 inch thick structural wall with ceilings and floors. Next slide. Also in the construction traffic, we will be shuttling workers to the site. We have the approval from 3 groups outside of the area that have allowed us to park there, and so we'll be rotating as necessary, and we'll submit those applications to the city for review. We'll also have construction valet or personnel that will be managing the traffic at the site. Important to note that there will be the pickups of either earth for the excavation or the concrete. It was done such that the trucks would be there on a 15-minute interval. So from the time I just began, and the next truck would come by in about 5 minutes. So that's the distance and time between the 2 trucks. So we don't have a preponderance of noise or pollution. There'll be no truck staging areas, no idling, and then once we get the vehicular elevator put in place within the facility, we'll be using that for parking staff on the site. And again, no excavation between Memorial Day and Labor Day. And because of these, there's a less than significant impact on the traffic. Now, Austin Faust who was the consultant hired by the city for the traffic analysis, also did an analysis of the use of the elevators for the vehicles. They found that 24 cars during the AM peak hour and 22 cars during the peak PM hours were the number of vehicles coming by the site. That equated to 1 vehicle every 3 to 4 minutes. The elevators can completely cycle, allow a car to go in, take it down to a level, and bring it back up to the street level in the range of 2 to 3 minutes. A typical resident would have about a minute to a minute and a half to come into the elevator and exit out to their proper location for their parking area. Austin Faust analysis concluded that the garage access design, which utilizes 2 vehicular elevators, would not create any substantial vehicle queuing on the Carnation. Next slide. Air quality, because again the CMP identified it, the air quality levels were left at a very, very low level. Next slide. This is the particles that we're actually testing, the threshold as established by South Coast AQMD, and we are 93% less than what is allowed for these. So the air quality meets and far exceeds what the allowable threshold is. Next slide. This is just simply a copy of the CMP schedule. We met with consultants and contractors to determine the exact time lengths we were dealing with here. Next. And then the excavation program, we established the 3 different levels, next, of the grading and how it would happen, identifying days to this, to each of the schedules. Next slide. Soils and geology, there were some questions concerning what we call the trapezoidal section, which I'll cover in just a second. But Sid Neblett, who is a very renowned soils engineer, geologic engineer, in his report it states that his opinion that the proposed development will enhance the stability of the existing bluff and will reduce the vulnerability of bluff erosion, primarily because the upper layer of land is much more loose than the lower sections. Next slide. This is a section through that. The lower portion, the daylight line at the bottom of the basement, sub-basement, is an average of 23 feet, in some cases 40 feet, and the upper section is 5 feet. This is a Monterey Formation, and so you see this is the actual striations of the bedrock, which kind of lock this bluff into its location. Next slide. So we've increased the public views by creating wider view planes on the westerly side and added a new view plane on the northerly side. We're providing public benches and fountains at one of the points. The northerly view corridor I'll show you in 1 second. And then we're going to be undergrounding 2 of the power poles, upgrading the storm sewer system, and then we're creating a sand dollar habitat protection program too. This is the view corridor to the west that was increased by 76%. This is where the amenities will be for viewing that, the ocean view. And this is a new view corridor that we will be creating for residents to look at the turning basin area. Next slide. Here's a picture of the expansion of the westerly view corridor from what it is to what we'll have. And then we don't see it here, but there's a view corridor that's established at this end of the building as well. Next. This is what you see through the northerly view plane, but it's going to be twice this width. Next. And the elimination of the telephone poles, power poles, and so this is the view without those utilities. Next slide. So a quick point on the character that was brought up, that we really were not in character with the neighborhood. Here's some of the architecture that you see today. Quite contemporary to eclectic, many different styles. Next. And contemporary to, I think they call this the Abbey. So there's quite a bit of variation and diversity that's there today. So we don't believe that that really is, that our project is disparaging of this. Next. This is on Ocean Boulevard, and what I've done here was identify the width of the buildings that equal the exposure of the AERIE project on Carnation. So that's the width of the project, which is similar to these that you see presently. In this particular case, this is the residence that is southerly of the AERIE site, and I want to relate these two to the project. Next. I did a little massing comparison between the width of the AERIE project, which is approximately 157 feet wide, and related to the building that is southerly of us, that is 153 feet wide. So this is about 4 feet wider in width than that residence on the bluff. Next. It also represents a height difference of about 6 feet. So that's me plus maybe 6 inches or so between the AERIE project from the base of the construction to the highest roof point, relative to the 40 feet on the residence to the south, from the lowest point of contact to the ground to its highest point. Now, I want to take you through a little slideshow here. This is the existing buildings. We're going to cut and paste this and then drop it on that site. It completely eliminates the building that's there. Next slide. And do the same thing with the AERIE project, where we take that residence, cut, paste it also. So it is completely consistent with the size of the buildings that are presently on the bluff. Next. And then we took the north-facing slope and did the same exercise, pulled it and put it in place. So what you see are buildings that are very similar in mass and scale to the buildings that are at the site. So tonight, thank you. Last slide. I believe that AERIE is defining the parameters of building on the coastal bluffs of Newport Beach. And I do take this project seriously. Newport Beach is not a provincial community, and this project is protecting Newport's natural resources, I believe, more than any other project in the city's history, while at the same time honoring individual property rights and creating unique, distinctive architecture. I personally don't know of any project proponent that has ever committed this effort to voluntarily support and help define the environmental aesthetic direction of a community. Now, that completes my presentation, but just to let you know, I do have slides that also can address the dock layout, the dock configuration, as well as any other aspects of the project plans, et cetera, that you may have. So from that, I would like to see if you have any questions that I may answer.
Any questions for Mr. Jeanette? Okay. Anybody want to ask any questions of the staff at this time? Wait for that too.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jeanette. Is Mr. Miles here? Okay, we're going to give you 15 minutes.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the...
If you can, I presume you're going to be making some comments on the EIR, and to the degree that you're addressing deficiencies, if you could be clear and concise on what those are so that we can address those. I'd appreciate it.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. Just as a bit of housekeeping, I do have materials that have been emailed I'd like to lodge. I have the original. Consists of a comment letter from my firm and from Liebold, McClendon, and Mann, and it includes 15 exhibits. I have an extra copy.
Is that what we have?
I think it's...
Is that,
so
that
this-
okay.
That package right here.
Mr. Mayor, Stephen Miles, Miles 10 Law Group on behalf of Residents for Responsible Development. Kind of as an outline of my presentation, I'm going to address a procedural issue, and then I'm going to get into some issues with respect to the city's housing element and under California planning and zoning law with respect to housing requirements. Then I'm going to finish with some issues with respect to the California Environmental Quality Act. I'm going to touch on three main subjects under CEQA. Predominantly the coastal bluffs that we saw some interesting renditions of with respect to the proposed development. I'm also going to talk about greenhouse gas emissions and Assembly Bill 32. And then going to talk about the alternatives analysis of the environmental impact report. As a procedural matter, we're in day 6 of arguably by the city's own notice of the Harbor Commission meeting. We're in day 6 of an appeal period that's 14 days. We raised this issue because it was a little confusing as to how you can have any efficacy to an appeal period if it ends 7 or 8 days from today. But with that, we just found it was a little bit suspect to be having a city council hearing within 14 days of a Harbor Commission proceeding. I don't know if that comes up a lot, but we raised that. We raised the insufficiencies and the errors in the notice of the public meeting for the July 8 Harbor Commission meeting. It classified that proceeding as an appeal and an appeal for reconsideration, neither of which I believe are true, which would render that notice invalid. And I would offer that that meeting should have been re-noticed and proceeded on, and then you should have given yourself about 14 days at least from the culmination of that meeting to have this proceeding. Jumping into some issues with respect to the city's housing element. Right now in California, we are on what's called the 4th revision of the housing element. And I'm sure the City Council is aware of the city's history with respect to its invalid and non-compliant housing element. Since about 2005, there's been a fairly significant amount of correspondence between HCD and the city with respect to the insufficiencies of the city's housing element and the city's inability to meet their regional housing needs assessment. Formally in 2005 and 2006 and 2007, and most recently in October of 2008, the director of HCD has informed the city in writing and confirmed that they are dramatically insufficient with respect to meeting its affordable housing requirements. And the reason I bring this up is that there is a nexus between this proposed development project and the city's affordable housing stock. There hasn't been a lot. In fact, I would argue that there is not substantial evidence in the record to support finding 8 of the draft resolution, which basically says that everything is peachy keen and we don't have an issue with respect to affordable housing. I think Mr. Campbell put it best. He said he was unaware of any affordability units at the prior the 15-unit apartment complex. Interestingly, the project is discussed as taking 15 residential units and reducing it to 8. And if you take any affordability into consideration, it really takes 15 units down to 0. There's a provision of the government code that states that the city's housing element must include a program that among other things will, quote, conserve and improve the condition of existing affordable housing stock, which may include addressing ways to mitigate the loss of dwelling units demolished by public or private action. That's Government Code Section 65583, Subpart C, Subpart 4. again, this is the type of program that you don't have in your housing element. It's something that needs to be addressed. Simply put, you can't, when you have an invalid housing element, you can't make a finding of consistency for this project with your general plan. And that's the Hornbook law. And so until affordable housing issues are addressed, we believe that this council is not in a position to approve this project. A little bit of history. Currently, the regional housing needs assessment for the city is 1,784 units of residential housing during the fourth planning period. Our written materials explain the deficiencies that you've had over the years. The city's nowhere close to achieving that goal. And needless to say, the substitution of 15 affordable units with 8 units that must each sell for an average minimum price of $12 million in order for the project just to pencil is going in a direction that is counter to what state law requires. And that's the nexus. That's why we're raising housing issues. And again, it's, and we'll get into the issues of the magnitude and scale of this, but it's almost like the environmental consultant for this project turned into a lobbyist, and basically it was an issue of let's try to come up with some creative arguments to get this thing pushed through. And starting with the coastal bluffs, I'd offer that in my 13 years of practice as a CEQA practitioner, I've come across some pretty creative arguments with respect to environmental impacts. This is one that's at the top of the list. We're dealing with the coastal bluffs issue. We're dealing with an issue of honesty under the California Environmental Quality Act. CEQA guidelines state that the determination of whether a project may have a significant effect on the environment calls for a careful judgment on the part of the public agency involved, based to the extent possible on scientific and factual data. That's CEQA guidelines section 15064 subpart B. We're dealing with an argument that I don't know the inception of it, but it's basically a consultant spin job where it's classified as the project's going to require the removal of all but basically a thin facade of the coastal bluff, and the consultant has artfully termed this thin veneer or trapezoidal pillar with the assurance that it'll last for the 75-year useful life of the condominium units. What is missing from this is the fact that the coastal bluff in the Monterey Formation is the entirety of the bluff. There is no distinction between a facade or a thin veneer or 10 feet, 15 feet, 5 feet, 23 feet of a bluff. When you remove 60% of the bluff, that's what you're doing. You're impacting the bluff. You're removing the material. The physical environment is affected, and the result is things like greater than 2,000 heavy diesel truck trips to the Brea landfill, and the production of 2,168 metric tons of carbon dioxide for a residential project of 8 units. An example of this tortured reasoning that's going on with respect to a conclusion that there's no impact to the coastal bluff is the Citadel Outlet Mall. We're all probably familiar with that 22-foot high wall that you'll see on Interstate 5. That's a cultural landmark, and when the Sampson Tire and Rubber Company went out of business and picked up shop, they turned it into an outlet mall. We all see the wall, but I don't think anyone here would contend that the tire factory itself still exists because that outer wall is there and you see it. A more local example is Chapman University. When the law school went in, they tore down the Orange Unified School District headquarters, but they preserved the building's facade, and they built a law school behind it. I don't think that anyone here would say that Orange Unified School District's headquarters itself exists behind that facade. It's gone. And just like the proposed project, the coastal bluff will be gone. And that's an impact, and that's something that needs to be mitigated. And it needs to be mitigated on several areas, including greenhouse gas emissions. The issue of greenhouse gas emissions from executive order, from our governor, on through Assembly Bill 32, is really an issue of cumulative impacts. Oftentimes in CEQA, we had concepts like de minimis impacts, and you don't need to worry about those. They're too small to deal with. You get a pass. Greenhouse gas emissions address the fact that it is a cumulative impact issue, and there is no such thing as de minimis impacts. The California courts have explained that one of the most important environmental lessons evident from past experience is that environmental damage often occurs incrementally from a variety of small sources. These sources appear insignificant, assuming threatening dimensions only when considered in light of the other sources with which they interact. Perhaps the best example is air pollution, where thousands of relatively small sources of pollution cause a serious environmental health problem. CEQA has responded to this problem of incremental environmental degradation by requiring an analysis of cumulative impacts, and that's the seminal case of Kings County Farm Bureau v. County of Hanford. As I mentioned previously, we're dealing with for an 8-unit residential project. So in terms of precedent for this city, as it's grappling with its requirement on a programmatic level to deal with greenhouse gas emissions, here's the precedent. A residential development project, 2,000 plus heavy diesel truck trips. And I mentioned that the environmental impact report did not really go into the detail of what the impact is associated with diesel trucks, and it's very significant. But couple that with the 2,168 metric tons of carbon dioxide, and this is a totally understated number. Again, we're talking about the harbor, the dock. There's no quantification of greenhouse gas emissions associated with the eight slips or the 100-foot yacht that's going to pull into town, or the staff and the assistance for these $12 million residences, and where are they going to park and where are they going to drive. But on the face, even though the environmental impact report has not identified a threshold of significance and has provided no mitigation measures whatsoever, there are 2,168 metric tons of carbon dioxide that are going to be created just from the construction phase of this project.
Give it 1 minute.
Excuse me?
1 minute.
Okay. There's various examples of what other jurisdictions have done to deal with this. Rancho Cordova assigns a 2-ton limit per person. Frankly, 2,168 metric tons is off the charts. It's dramatic, and it needs to be addressed. In terms of alternatives, if I can just spare an extra minute so I can get through the issue with alternatives. Simply put, what you have here is a project that has narrowly defined its project objectives to a point where you cannot really have an alternative. And so the alternatives analysis of the environmental impact report is a pretext. It's a pretext for a foregone conclusion. It's probably because this thing started with a mitigated negative declaration that didn't address alternatives. And the federal courts have claimed that one obvious way for an agency to slip past the strictures of NEPA, and this is the CEQA equivalent, is to contrive a purpose so slender as to define competing reasonable alternatives out of consideration. And that's what we have here. Objective 4 and Objective 5 of the project are fashioned in a way that there is no alternative that can be addressed that actually preserves the coastal bluff. Objective number 5 talks about the use of new technology for parking, and so this can only be accomplished by removing the coastal bluff, and so any alternative that actually preserves the coastal bluff will not satisfy the project objective. And this isn't what CEQA calls for. you can't narrowly define your objectives to a point where you can't truly analyze an alternative. For example, a simple alternative of eliminating less of the coastal bluff. And to the extent that there's speculation that 5 units or a 3-home alternative isn't going to pencil out economically, there's no evidence in the record that that's anything but speculation. And if a project alternative is dismissed merely on economic grounds, it's a requirement of CEQA that a detailed economic analysis be provided to assure that that position is valid. So with that, I will, if you have any questions or if you need to call me up, I'm available. Thanks.
Okay. Any questions, Mr. Miles? Councilwoman Gardner.
No, before we, thank you very much.
Okay, well, let's see if anyone else has any questions. Any? Okay, thank you, Mr. Miles. Okay, go ahead.
I want to pick up on one thing. I got a bunch of comments. I'm sorry that I can't give you answers. I feel like people come and they say, well, why did you ask this question 6 months ago? Well, a lot of times you review and review, and then someone's letter or someone's comment triggers something. So my process is this ongoing rolling wheel. But Mr. Miles talked about lobbying in the EIR. And I have to agree in terms of the language that it does read that way. And I don't like to sit up here and criticize because guess what? I get to sit up here and criticize. And if I criticize a consultant or a staff member, they don't get to come up, or at least if they're smart, they don't come up and say, your mother's wears army shoes or something. So I want to be delicate, but I also think that we can learn from this experience that the language should not be that of a cheerleader, because then it throws into question what may be very objective findings, but it makes it very hard to read through that. For example, I'm asking just some that struck my mind. Only 7 of the 8 units use the elevators. Only 7 of the 8. Well, okay. I guess we could have 8 of 8 and it'd be a problem. I mean, only isn't used that way. In the developer's book, it says, AERIE's organic design will seamlessly meld into the bluff top, harmonizing with the natural landscape, a vast improvement to the existing rectangular eyesore structures. That's fine. I mean, I would expect the architect to be proud of his project, and I would expect the applicant to be effusive in his description. But what do we find in the EIR? The project's curvilineal features will allow the building to blend into the bluff when compared to the existing rectilinear features of the existing structure. In the academic world, that would be plagiarism. But here, it just sounds like we've jumped on the bandwagon. And finally, as far as the alternatives, I think we get into the same kinds of problems. In the other alternatives, the 3 single family and the 5, it states that all these extra amenities, the catch basin, the telephone pole removal, will not be required. So that implies that the city, if we go and grant the 8-unit project, is requiring these. But that's not the case. As it stated later, it states very clearly that the applicant is voluntarily doing these things if he gets the project he wants. Well, that's fine, but when we use the required for one, and there's this sort of sense of trying to structure it so that you can't look at that alternative. You say, oh, we're losing all this. Well, he's not required to do it. We don't get it necessarily because it's bigger. We get it because he's voluntarily doing it. And the alternatives, and when they're valued, they're not valued equally. Some, modification 8A, alternative 8A and B, they get partials. They partially achieve an objective, and yet alternate 5, which partially achieves some of those objectives, doesn't get that. So I'm not saying that the EIR is fatally flawed, but I'm saying when we have language like this that seems to be pushing the project forward, which doesn't seem to be objective, it's no wonder that there are questions as to where the city's position is on this, instead of being this neutral body. With my little lecture over. Some questions that I hope will be addressed. The emergency access. Is this an emergency access, or is it simply a way to get to the docks? Is it required? And why is that not violating what we had said was the predominant line of development. If the stairway anchor erodes, they'll remove the stair. Okay, how are we going to get to the dock then? Are we just going to slide down the cliff? I mean, it seems to me that's not going to happen. We're not going to say suddenly you can't get to your dock. Pier head versus bulkhead. I'd like to have a discussion of that because I'm concerned. I know we're not designing the dock tonight, but I'm concerned about precedents. It says, for example, that this is similar to all to docks in the neighborhood, and my view of what they've shown us is that it's not very similar. And I'm concerned that if we have setting a precedent of new lines there, will we have other boats then that are obscuring that very important code? So I'm sure you'll have some comments on that. Modifications and easements. I understand the easement to the north of the building. That gives us a better view. I don't understand, though, why we grant easements if they are on the balconies, if they are intruding onto people's private views. I understand we don't protect private views in general, but would we grant an easement that did impact a private view? That seems to be something that we should discuss. Also, some concerns still about the public views. I don't think we had a full discussion on the impact of Begonia Park, and there's some suggestions about some static public views from across the bay that might be impacted that we would, I'd like some more information on. So those are some of the issues I'd like to see us have fuller discussion on tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Daigle?
I had a couple questions for Mr. Jeanette.
Yes.
In terms of the basement and excavation, what are property owners trying to achieve? And if you can maybe comment from just citywide trends in terms of people wanting to do these basements, and if you can kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Basements have been happening within the city and coastal areas for a number of years, up and down the coast from Newport, Dana Point, Laguna Beach, etc. We find that there's a preponderance of our clients asking for basements because it gives them an opportunity to hide those things that they really don't need to take land up to do. It offers more open space. If I put cars in a basement, it offers substantially greater open space on the ground plane upward. So there is a strong desire. Some projects, I actually have some slides if you wanted to see some of those, but we have projects that have substantial amounts of mechanical systems, storage systems. In some cases, they're solar systems that we're putting for storage of water tanks, batteries, and things like that, which it would be a shame, really, to take those and put those on the grade, basically, because you'd lose that opportunity. But we're seeing a lot of them.
Brian, I just, more open space, or is it more square footage? I mean, I don't see a lot of people, at least in Corona Del Mar, when they build a basement, I don't see a yard. I see they've built every single part of it. So it seems more like the basement is there so they can put their cars someplace else and not have the normal garage that takes up square footage from the residents.
Well, presently, Councilman Gardner, and I don't want to preach to the choir by any means, but presently the zoning in the city says you have 1.5 times your buildable area. Put it anywhere you want, but that's all you get. So if you put it in the basement, you're going to relieve the pressure of the massing of the building from the ground plane upward. So if you're going to put 500 square feet of garages in the basement, it's coming out of the upper levels. So you do create a smaller massive building. Now, if you look at the way the zoning is developing at this point, today, through the LCP committee, there are trade-offs where they're trying to say, if we make a smaller massive building, then we're going to, and this obviously has to go through a lot of approval processes, but if you reduce the mass of the building on the upper levels, because we're going to allow you to do some basements, they're again reducing the upper mass that one sees. The net effect is you're seeing smaller development above grade. So that is a principle, I believe, that really makes a lot of sense. If you're going to bury it, you take it off the upper levels. You reduce the mass, you reduce the impact to the neighborhood.
Okay, so then my other question, so what you're basically saying, it's not unique to this project, it's something that's being done really coastal-wide in California, a lot in our community, a lot in Laguna Beach, and that the idea is that you're taking mass from what would be above ground and putting it below ground.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. And then my other question, the massing comparison that you showed, I think it needs more explanation, because you had the Macintosh, which was about 10,000 square feet, and then you just kind of showed the front view. But in fact, there's 30,000 more square foot above ground. Can you kind of show explain the layout of the property as far as how that massing is laid out?
Certainly. Would you like me to do that now?
Yeah,
Okay.
probably on a slide might work best.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think Councilmember Daigle's question has to do with, if you're looking at the building, the analysis that I went through was looking at the mass of the building, both in length and width. Her question begs more to the question of how many square feet we have above grade versus what you're looking at, one project versus the other. And we did that analysis, but it was a confusing slide. And so I decided not to use that. But the fact is that the AERIE site, if you go to the site plan. The AERIE site is about 99 feet of structure on the existing pad. In this particular case, the Macintosh residence is around 32 feet wide. So if you take this element and stretch it across here 3 times, you have roughly the same amount of area that you were just discussing. So from a massing standpoint, why do we have a substantially larger pad? Because it's a 1.4 acre site and there's 20,000 square feet of area up here. They had a coastal slope that they were working on and a much narrower site. But 3 times this is what you see up there.
Okay, so it's basically Macintosh 3 deep.
Exactly.
But as you look at it from the harbor, you're just seeing Macintosh.
Right. Okay. You're seeing the same, roughly the same width and a very similar height.
Okay, is that it? Okay. All right. Any of the staff or council comments? Councilman Henn?
Yes, I have a couple questions for our city attorney. Mr. Miles indicated that, in his view, there was defective notice of the Harbor Commission action, and that somehow that affects the appeal period relating to this action coming before council. And I'd like to have your opinion about whether or not you agree or disagree with that. And then secondly, Mr. Miles indicated that this project is not approvable, in his view at least, because until the affordable housing element is approved. And is there a nexus, is that issue, is there a nexus for that issue to what we're considering here tonight?
Thank you, Councilmember Henn. First is the Harbor Commission hearings. I disagree with Mr. Miles. As I explained to him on the telephone after the hearings, that in fact what was going on at the Harbor Commission is they were performing their advisory role to the council and to the Planning Commission related to this project. They take an initial action in April. They decided they wished to reevaluate that action, and they appointed a task group in which the task group actually did some fact-finding and brought it back to the commission for action. While the staff report phrased it for convenience as an appeal and or reconsideration, it was neither. And in fact, it's not an appealable action. The Harbor Commission was simply giving its recommendations in its advisory role. So there's no time limit running. There's no 14 days. There's nothing like that. What Mr. Miles is confusing it with is when the Harbor Commission exercises permit jurisdiction, where it might deal with an appeal of a Harbor Resources Manager decision, and then that decision by the Harbor Commission would be appealable to this council. But that's not the situation we're dealing with here, so it has actually no procedural implication.
Even though it was noticed as an appeal?
It was described as an appeal. It's the notice. Well, you know, the truth is staff doesn't always use, in an effort to try and explain what's going on, sometimes the nomenclature is not as accurate as it would be from a legal standpoint. It was stated as an appeal. It wasn't an appeal. It simply was not. Reading the staff report, you see what's going on, and you see the role being performed by the Harbor Commission. So I don't think that has anything to do with it. With respect to the housing element, well, I would disagree with Mr. Miles again. No, our housing element has not been deemed to be completely consistent with state law by HCD. HCD is not the be-all and end-all. We certified that housing element, in our opinion, that previously that it was consistent with state law. HCD disagrees. HCD doesn't have jurisdiction to ultimately make that determination. The courts do. No court has said we're invalid. You can imply your housing element. I disagree with Mr. Miles. I don't think you have an impediment based upon your housing element. That having been said, of course, we just got their long letters, and I disagree with their analysis, but if anything else changes in the analysis, we'd certainly report to you. But right now, we're working through HCD, through their comments, to get a certification of being consistent with state law, but that doesn't mean we're not consistent. So thank you.
Okay, any other?
So the net of that is we have no legal impediments here associated with the issues that he raised.
Yes, sir. Correct. No legal impediments. I disagree with his assertion in that regard.
Councilman Daigle?
Yes, could you clarify for the public who does grant the permit and what the appeal process is when the permit is granted, if that's what the Harbor Resources Manager decides?
Sure, certainly. And it gets confusing, it really does. And what's interesting about this process, for those of us who are CEQA lawyers, and he's done it for 13 and I've done it for 25, and it does get confusing. But the Harbor Commission is conducting, in this situation, an advisory role on an EIR. It's not the peer permit it was considering. Once an EIR is approved, which is why you have the dock situation addressed in it, the Harbor Resources Manager will use the environmental analysis in order to evaluate the possibility of a peer permit, along with our building department. Will issue a peer development permit. That permit is done after, if you should choose to certify the EIR. It's somewhere down the road when they make their application for their building permit and their harbor development permit. Harbor Resources Manager makes that determination. That determination is appealable to the Harbor Commission, which becomes then an appealable action once they take action to this council, and that's when the 14 days begins to run. So we're not even in that process yet. We haven't done the first step on environmental review, which is in your discretion tonight.
So what, as far as the dock issue tonight, we are not obviously designing the dock, but we are approving it in a certain sense if we approve the EIR, and we would be approving it out to the bulkhead as, I mean, huh? It's a bulkhead, isn't it?
Pierhead.
Pierhead? Okay, I'm not a sailor, so one is farther than the other, that's all I know. And we're going to the max. So would we be approving that in a sense? We would just be saying, oh, it's okay if you want to do that, but if we felt differently, if we felt it shouldn't be that far, would that be part of the EIR approval, that we would make that note, or would that just be comment as guidance to the Harbor Resources Manager?
Can I back up a second?
Mm-hmm.
What you're dealing with tonight that affects the dock is the certification of an EIR. Your EIR takes a look at all of the environmental impacts of the project as a whole. Now, the dock is included as part of the project as a whole. You're not issuing any permits for the construction of that dock, and any conditioning of the building permit for that dock is at a staff level after you evaluate the environmental impacts and mitigate significant impacts that you determine to be present. So the Harbor Resources Manager and Building Department become the permitting authority, not you. You are not permitting a dock tonight. So, and I make it akin to, it's kind of like, and I don't mean to make this too convoluted, but it's like, if you imagine the Harbor Resources Manager as being a separate agency. Let's say you're permitting something and you need what we would call a 404 permit of the Clean Water Act, and only the Army Corps of Engineers can issue it. You may have to do the NEPA-CEQA document, but they're what we would call a responsible agency. Your CEQA-NEPA document has to take into account everything they need to consider, and they can comment on it. That's what your Harbor Commission did. It's saying, okay, thank you for looking at this. This is what we think is important in that document. It will then consider a permit later down the road. So you're not permitting anything. You're deciding whether or not the environmental review is adequate for the purposes of that permit later.
So that we could say, in terms of the dock, that we feel it has a significant impact, even though the EIR says it doesn't have a significant impact, and that would be, that's what we would rule on?
Yeah, if you have evidence that would support something other than anecdotal. By the way, I would note Mr. Miles is correct. You need scientific evidence. I would also point out that attorney's testimony is not scientific evidence. So if you have something that's other than anecdotal evidence or statements by lawyers that concludes that there's environmental impacts and you believe that the EIR is wrong, you don't certify it. Or you create other mitigation measures that you have evidence to support that would further mitigate it, any environmental impacts caused by the dock.
Okay, thank you.
But then, so with regard to the docks then, if we certify the EIR tonight, Harbor Resources Manager approves the dock design, let's say as it's described in the EIR that we're certifying tonight, it gets appealed to the Harbor Commission, they certify it, gets appealed to City Council, right? I mean, that's the appeal chain. So it is at the point that it would appear to the City Council on appeal that the City Council would then weigh in directly as to whether or not it believed the docks were constructed properly. That would be our opportunity to actually weigh in on that specific issue.
Correct, and that's the building permits for the dock. What you're looking at tonight is whether the environmental review is adequate to address the potential environmental impacts of construction of the dock. Building permits are different. If you approve a subdivision, you're not issuing building permits. You're saying that the subdivision's okay. Building permits then go through your building department. That's the same kind of analogy.
Okay, another question. You say scientific evidence, but some of this is judgmental. I mean, some of this is a judgment call, isn't it? I mean, as far as, I'm thinking of the construction management plan. Say that's not significant. Well, if you live on Seaview Avenue and a big truck is coming by every 15 minutes, you might be inclined to think it was significant.
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
I mean, I don't know what scientific evidence you would have that could say this is significant and this isn't in a case like that. It's
No, judgmental, there's a judgment that needs to be made on your part. Mr. Miles talks about thresholds of significance and greenhouse gas emissions issues. And he's right, there's no threshold of significance. As a matter of fact, there's not been one adopted by anyone. They're still in this sort of the speculative stage. It needs to be evaluated. I agree with him completely. I believe it has been evaluated. We simply can't speculate. That's a judgment of significance. Let's use something. Mr. Miles is talking about this pillar, this pillar of bluff face. You've got an architect telling you it can be preserved, and you build a basement, your bluff face is not going to be affected. You have a competent expert giving you that testimony. Mr. Miles can't then say, I'm an engineer, unless he is, or an architect, saying the architect's wrong. Under CEQA, Mr. Miles' evidence in that regard, because it's really properly subject to expert testimony, isn't sufficient to find an error in the environmental impact analysis. But anecdotal evidence, say from the neighbors, you say, I've lived here, I've seen this kind of traffic, I've lived here for goodness knows however many years. If you find it persuasive, that is admissible evidence because they're physically there, it has a reason to understand it. They simply can't testify as to expert things that are not substantiated.
Okay, any other questions this time? Okay, I'll invite the applicant back up to make any rebuts. Mr. Miles?
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I just had a few items I'd just like to touch on. And some of it was just discussed, I think, by the city attorney. And that was, what qualifications does Mr. Miles have to opine on the structural stability of the slope? I have done these no less than 50 times in these locations and have never had any of them fail. So I question his ability to.
Brian, a question on that. I just, being a long time, is that the same kind of rock formation that's down by Little Corona, or is that a different kind? Because I know you did the house above Little Corona, and we had that big rock slide of what?
It's actually a
15 years
very
ago?
different soil. This is a Monterey formation. In fact, if I could just digress a second, the rock house in Laguna Beach was the same material, and we kept up both sides completely on a vertical condition in a slope that was even smaller than this. The Gucci house I did in Laguna Beach, the basement was the same condition, same material, and we held nothing sloughed, nothing failed whatsoever. We went down to, on the Portobello house, we have a less than 20-foot girth of soil, i.e. Similar material, on the face of that facing the ocean, no failures whatsoever. And I have pictures of these if you'd be interested to see them. but I play in the dirt a lot in these situations, and I really have a much better feel for it than I think Mr. Miles does.
Brian?
Yes.
When you were doing your soils testing for this, did you take core samples at all? Or?
We did take core samples, and they're still, I don't know if I actually could show you, Don. That's. This is a piece of one of the core samples. It stands on its own.
Well, core samples sometimes will be a little bit easier for people to see what.
Yeah, normally you would hold it in a bag and, and watch the pieces of the soil fall apart, whereas this is what was dug out of that, with holes that were 70 and 80 feet deep. Now, if you have questions concerning the geology or the soils conditions, both of our consultants, geologic as well as soils engineering, are here tonight to answer questions that you may have in that vein. Concerning the tortured reasoning that Mr. Miles spoke of and the Citadel Outlet Mall, I chose to believe that this is not anything like the Citadel Outlet Mall. This is a very sophisticated piece of property, and we're treating it as such. Rather than get, you want that back. I think Councilperson Gardner had a question concerning the 8 units, of which one of them isn't going to use the elevator.
No, that was simply an example of language that I think we need to be more careful of. I wasn't commenting on the elevators or not elevators, just the language of the EIR in that respect. So.
Okay, well, if I might clarify, because I think you did raise a point that can be confusing. The parking for that particular unit is at street level, and so he has no reason to use the elevator to access his parking area. He drives in, like the guest parking, and it gets right to it. So
I understood that. It's just when someone says only 7 of 8, I mean, that to me is just not using the language correctly. Only 1 of 8, yeah, I get that. That's all.
Yeah, and that's just the vehicular. It's certainly going to use his own internal people elevators, which are there. Concerning the issues of affordability, I'm not up to date with the HCD regulations, but I do know that at the time that they were notifying the residents that were living there, the owner came to the city and said, how do I need to do this? Because I want to make sure it is done properly with these people, leaving the premises so that they can move on to whatever they're doing, and gave that notification to those residents twice. And so it was really kind of the way in which it was done was manufactured by the city, and the owner of the property carried it through that way. And he did say something that I do believe is more than accurate. He talked about the consultant's spin job, and he said, this is going to last for 75 years, and actually I think it's going to last substantially longer than 75 years. So if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
I do. It's called emergency access, basement exit, dock access. So is it really an emergency exit, and if so, who requires it?
Yes. It's a very good point, and it's often obscured. It is the second exit out of that basement area. So in order to provide exiting per code, we need 2 forms of exiting a certain distance apart, and this represents one of those exits. The fire department has also looked at it and said the present concrete landing at the just landward of the edge of the cove is a refuge area, so that we can and want us to put a dry standpipe down there, a fire hydrant down there, so that they can man a fire from that location if they need to. So from that standpoint, it's a required exit from the building.
But not required by the fire department. It wasn't in their list of requirements.
No, but it's required by the building department.
Okay.
And then it's also used as access to the dock. So it really performs the 2 functions.
Okay. And then the balconies. What's the usual height of a balcony?
The balconies that encroach on the 9-foot view side, the northerly side, those that would encroach in the view plane, if you were to stand at the street, a person that's like Mayors, Selich, and most of these gentlemen here, 6 feet high, we said there's a plane up here then any encroachments won't affect the view. And there's a plane that you're looking down at the bay that we wanted to make sure that nothing was encroaching from that angle, and the landscaping would also not impair that view. But once we get beyond that or below it, those encroachments then had no effect because they don't bother the view of the turning basin in that case. So that's why some of those went out a little further, but not within the view plane that was established.
Not within the public view plane.
Correct. Well, it's the view plane that we're creating for the public, yes.
Okay, but it does impede someone's private view. It says in here that it will impinge on certain private views. I mean, that's what is stated in the thing.
From the people behind on Carnation that would be looking toward the bay, it could impede to a certain extent the private views. The encroachments are about 18 inches.
So what is the normal height of a balcony?
A normal height of a balcony, the handrail is 42 inches.
And why are these 6 feet?
These are 6 feet so that I protect the privacy of the neighbor adjacent to us. We didn't want to be looking into the neighbor, so we're using some opal type. It's a stone that we're shaving that has a lot of character to it, but you don't see through it. So it's a higher element that's much more decorative than just a wall per se. So I get sunlight into the space. But that aspect is primarily to prevent issues of privacy between the two neighbors at 215 in this project. I confuse you?
I just thought they were metal for some reason from the
There's
drawings.
some metal on them, but then it also has an opalescent barrier that you can't see through. It just lets the sunlight through.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Jeanette? Okay. Thank you. Well, you don't get to ask questions. Okay, thank you, Mr. Jeanette.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to open it up to public comments. You'll have 3 minutes each, and if you have something you want to bring up during your 3 minutes, you can do it then. So,
This is for the council.
and remember to watch the lights, please.
I have a question about that, please. I would like to ask for an additional minute before the meeting to say something to the council off this record of the evening tonight.
Well, everything's on the record.
Well, okay, it's on the record, but what I'd like to do is thank Mayor Selich and the city council for honoring my late husband, John McIntosh, at the close of the May meeting. John opened his first snack shop restaurant in Corona Del Mar, had 7 restaurants within the city of Newport Beach and Corona Del Mar, and of the more than 220 restaurants nationwide, more were located in Orange County than any other county. John sincerely believed in supporting the community which so strongly supported him. He was a man of extremely high standards, integrity, and honesty, and I would again like to thank you for bestowing this honor and this plaque to him. Second thing I would like to ask is that I did not realize I am the cut and paste house that was shown tonight, and I didn't realize I would have to defend that. So I'd just like an extra minute at the end. John was adamantly opposed to the AERIE project as proposed, as am I. We were, and I am still very much in favor of the demolition of the existing old structure and the redevelopment of the property. This has never been an issue. We did express our concerns to the applicant about the massive overdevelopment of the property, and at his request for suggestions, we did say that we felt a smaller number of individual structures versus the 6-story, 8-unit proposed condominium complex would better suit the neighborhood and would probably meet less resistance from the neighbors. This has fallen on deaf ears. I've heard at least 3 other leading developers, consultants, and architects offer to help the applicant reduce the numbers to minimize destruction to the bluff and to conform to the policies of the city, but to my knowledge, this has also been ignored. We, the residents for responsible development, have continued to request that the project be scaled back to a number of units that would reduce the massive excavation of this protected coastal bluff and the incalculable damage and negative impact on the immediate community of more than 3,000 truck trips for the excavation and construction that are going to be made through our small streets. I think the actual level of excavation for the footings is below that indicated for the first sub-basement slab at 30 feet, and when calculated below the shaft slabs at 25 feet, it will be at least 20 feet or less above mean sea level. Is this really consistent with other properties on Carnation Avenue that have had to adhere to the predominant line of existing development? How will this affect the future development when you have a policy that new construction must minimize alteration of a coastal bluff to the maximum extent per the coastal land use plan of Newport Beach? This is not being enforced on this application, even though they have plans for as few as 5 units. The actual building area for this property is less than 30,000 square feet due to the fact that more than 66% of the property is submerged or unbuildable. No matter how the applicant or his team try to change this fact, no matter how hard the applicant or his team try, this fact cannot be changed, and I hope that they do not request a permit to build underwater. The developer continues to ignore requests to scale down. States that 5 units will not give him enough profit, that he will not be able to live in one of the units at no cost to himself, and that he is going to be very angry if he does not get his way. None of which addresses the massive and destructive overdevelopment of this protected coastal bluff and the equally oversized marina that he is requesting. From the numerous aerial views of Newport Harbor, which I have included in your packet, I see no other private residential docking system with the number of slips and a wave attenuator of 100 feet. Does that mean I'm out of time? Okay. No other dock of this size that projects so far into Newport Harbor and so far beyond the docks on either side. This should be a cause of concern to not only the city but to all boaters and parents. This area of the harbor between Pirates Cove and the Harbor Department Coast Guard Station inside the buoys and channel marker number 5 has been used by electric boaters, including the applicant, canoers, kayakers, paddlers, swimmers, and children, to stay out of the main harbor and the heavy boat traffic that has existed at this narrow portion of the harbor since its inception. Is it within the rights of the applicant to request this massive structure? Certainly. But does it make good, safe boating sense for the community? Absolutely not. Not every property on the water is guaranteed a dock facility per Harbor Resources Commissioners, who have expressed their concerns over the impracticality and danger of this structure. By limiting the number of units, the number of slips would be self-limiting, or it is within your right to permit a lesser number of slips and limit the size of the dock structure so that it is not an obstruction or a dangerous projection. I could eliminate the last part, but I would just like to address the fact that my house is approximately 6,000 square feet. It's not 10,000 square feet. I do not have a basement as indicated. The lower portion of the plans is actually the support wall for the entire project. The architect unfortunately didn't show that my house has setbacks at all different levels and sides, front and back, and at the back has 2 open atriums. I don't know how they can compare it to that. The house is approximately 1 room and 1 hallway deep throughout the whole house. We're built on Ocean Boulevard, not Carnation. We were allowed to build below street level, and it is a very long house. It's very narrow. I don't think that you're comparing apples to oranges at this point. I left a little extra addition at the bottom for you to read if you are interested, but thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Actually, I do have a question. You make a statement in this written document here that there's been at least 2 violations of the Brown Act.
I didn't go into that.
Have you followed up on that with the appropriate authorities? It seems to me that's a pretty serious thing to say.
I did talk to one of the commissioners, and it was stated that any time that information prior to a meeting and a vote by committee is disclosed, that that's a violation of the Brown Act. 2 times. And I would probably be very happy to sit down with you.
Well, I'm not the person that would determine what's a violation of the Brown Act, but I'd be curious about the city attorney's opinion about that.
Forgive me, Ms. McIntosh, I didn't understand what the claim of violation was.
On 2 occasions, the outcome of the meeting was announced to a representative of the applicant prior to the meeting taking place. And it was my understanding in talking to a council member that that violates the Brown Act. I didn't bring it up because
These were planning commission meetings you're talking about?
one was a planning and one was a city council meeting.
Councilmember Henn, certainly if more than a majority of either council or planning commission shared their views in order to develop a collective consensus with respect to an issue, be it the AERIE project or another, outside the context of a properly noticed public meeting, yes, it is a Brown Act violation. And so, I mean, all I have is a council member's statement or someone's statement, and I have found, I would need more. I have found that sometimes people sort of forecast, they know what the answer is, but if there's more information with that, I'd ask Mrs. McIntosh at another time to share it with me.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, folks, no clapping tonight, please. Okay, we're going back to 3 minutes now. I gave Mrs. McIntosh a little extra.
Thank you. I'll try and stay within that. I'm Marilyn Beck. I live at 303 Carnation. I'm on the Carnation Bluff just up from the project. There are a lot of people here tonight and watching on TV who are concerned about this project. For the record, it isn't, our concerns aren't about preserving private views or about the design. We are all supporters of property rights. We want to see the site redeveloped, and we welcome Rick and Karen as developers and as neighbors. Why we are here tonight is because we strongly believe that this project is wrong and the consequences of building it impact every person sitting here tonight. We don't understand why the city is pushing for this project. We would like to understand what you see as the benefits of this project to the community that will override the serious negatives. We hope that each of you, and thank you, Councilmember Gardner, for talking about some of this, we hope that you will speak to these concerns. Yes, it replaces a dilapidated eyesore, but replacing it with something so out of context with the scale of the neighborhood and severely damaging the bluff and the harbor in the process just doesn't make sense to us. The part that is most difficult to understand is that the general plan, at least my understanding of it, protects against this type of coastal bluff development. It requires developers to minimize alterations to coastal bluffs and natural landforms. Constructing subterranean levels means excavating the bluff completely and then putting dirt back over the concrete to recreate the bluff. There are no properties constructed like this on the Carnation Bluff. There are no basements on the Carnation Bluff. We're talking about a bluff, not somewhere else in Corona del Mar. Nothing is subterranean. Subterranean destroys the natural landform, and natural landforms are protected in the general plan. And you have discretion over this because of the variances. Why not consider a smaller alternative that stays above the predominant line like everything else on the Carnation Bluff? The construction traffic is going to be terrible through the village and the streets of Corona del Mar. The streets are in poor condition. Who's going to pay for the repair of the streets? And who will be liable for the damage to private property along the truck route? The people opposing the project are a knowledgeable group. There are developers, builders, engineers, at least 2 former city planners. None of us can understand why the city would want to approve a project that doesn't conform to the land use plan, which will set precedents both in the harbor and for future bluff development on Carnation, and which may cost significant amounts to the city for repair to roadways. In the 1960s, a developer proposed the Channel Reef to the then City Council. No one today can understand how it passed approval. AERIE is the largest development in Corona del Mar since Channel Reef. 2 seconds. We believe that there are alternatives. It doesn't have to be so enormous. It doesn't have to have the largest private marina, or his and her locker rooms, or wine storage and tasting rooms. And it doesn't have to impact hundreds of other residents in order to be built. It could be smaller. There are alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, folks, come on. Let's knock the clapping off, please.
Council, my name is Warren James. I live at 2627 Cove Street. I'm a strong proponent of property rights, and when a developer buys property, they know what the rules are, the height restrictions, setbacks, and so forth. In this case, I see there's a myriad of variances that the developers are asking for. My opinion is, hey, follow the rules that were in existence when you bought the property. If he wants to follow that, I'll be up here and support it. But the way it is, where he wants to come in and change the plan, after he already knew what the game plan was, I strongly object to any variances.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kent Harvey, 316 Poppy, Corona Del Mar. Last time I appeared before you was 1951. This is true. I had the good fortune of growing up in Corona Del Mar in the 40s and 50s. We were kind of an unsupervised group. My parents had a rather laissez-faire approach to child rearing. And we rode our bikes between Corona Del Mar and Balboa Island, because Balboa Island had a lot of vacant lots. We played baseball in them. And one of my friends almost got hit by a car. So I wrote a letter to the council, and they thought it was really cute. I came down, got my picture taken with Dora Hill, and I proposed this bike route, a safe bike route along Bayside. How are we doing with that project? Anyway, I'm not a council gadfly. You haven't seen me around here since then. I saved myself for the really important issues, and I think that this is one of them. The fact that I grew up in the 40s and 50s in Corona Del Mar doesn't make me special. It makes me exceedingly lucky. My dad was an architect who designed a lot of houses in Corona Del Mar. He designed some of Mrs. McIntosh's competitors' restaurants, the Jolly Roger, and Frank Lloyd Wright agreed with my father that good design involved designing a project to conform to the topography of the site. Unfortunately, I had to leave Corona Del Mar in 1963 for some military service and employment elsewhere. My mother always told us that Corona Del Mar was the best place in the world. I spent 24 years living elsewhere, and I proved my mother right. Corona Del Mar is the best place in the world. I'm so envious of Councilman Gardner for being able to represent this wonderful place. With all deference to those of you from Balboa Island and Newport, Corona Del Mar is the best. Why is it the best? The realtors all seem to know. And if we read the paper ads for any real estate in Corona Del Mar, it all has to do with scale, with, we hear words like village, we hear walk to restaurants and shops, old Corona Del Mar spelled with an E. It's the scale. Developers over my lifespan, I know, have always endeavored to capitalize on that ambiance, and there's a huge temptation to do so and to, in fact,
Can you wrap it up, please?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up. I've rambled. I need notes here to remind myself of my name, but the obvious issue is alternatives. The lawyers have been one-upping each other with respect to CEQA experience. I did pass the bar in 1970, worked for County of San Diego during a 10-year period when we were implementing CEQA. Obviously, alternatives are the issue. We even kicked around a proposal down there to require a fee to hire an outside architect and planner to develop an alternative proposal. We have a very slick presentation on what the developer wants. We don't have a clue as to what a good alternative would look like. And we know it's out there, and I think that's something that we should consider. Thanks for your time.
Just a little family history. Kent Harvey is the reason my father ended up as presiding justice of the Court of American Samoa.
Evening, Mr. Mayor. My name is Alan Beek. Beaches and bluffs are dramatic and photogenic, and they're the defining things for a coastline, and they feel anybody who would like to build has dollar signs in his eyes with wonderful ambitions to build mansions and towers and temples and hotels and sell off units costing millions of dollars. And we in Newport Beach have decided that our beaches and our bluffs are residential, and they are not to be devoted to Taj Mahals and hotels. We're to keep them residential, and we aren't going to be like Waikiki Beach. And to accomplish that, we have set limits on the height of what can be built on the top of a bluff, and that certainly squashes the ambition of those people who would like to build. And so then they came out off the front, and we have set limits on how far out they can extend, and that squashes their ambitions even further. And they pretty much had to settle for more or less modest houses and homes, which is what we intend. And we never made a rule against going back in and digging out and removing the bluff itself, because nobody ever thought such a thing could happen. And now here it is. We're going to defeat the rules by going and taking away a huge big piece of the bluff. And if it happens here, it's going to happen again. You're setting a precedent in what you decide to do with this project. And naturally, I'm going to ask you to reject that idea and do not set the precedent that we can allow the bluff to be just taken away to make room for the buildings you aren't permitted to build on top of it or in front of it. Geologists have noted that coastal bluffs have the characteristic that they gradually recede as the waves cut away at the bottom. Coastal bluffs are known to move backward. But that backward movement is going to accelerate a whole lot if you permit this, as the bluffs are taken away by bulldozers and quarriers and developments instead of by the surf. I please ask you to reject it.
Thank you, Alan. Folks, come on now. It's about the fourth time I've asked you to not do that. Before we have our next speaker, Mayor Pro Tem Curry is going to have to leave the meeting. He has a few words he wants to say.
I just want to apologize to both the supporters and the opponents of the project. I was hopeful that we would be done in 2 hours, but I unfortunately have a job that compels me to be in Philadelphia tomorrow at 10 a.m., which means I have to be on the red-eye tonight from Los Angeles Airport. But I appreciate all of the comments in the emails and the correspondence. Thank you very much.
Okay. Go ahead, ma'am.
Good evening, members of the Newport Beach City Council and staff. My name is Sharon McNally, and I have resided at 3228 Ocean Boulevard since 1971. I think the city attorney will agree I am an authority. I would like to refute what Planning Commissioner Eaton's observation was that the residents aren't concerned about the truck trips. My major concern with the AERIE, besides the fact that I don't like it, I'm living for 4 years now to the major.
Do you want to pull that microphone a little closer so we can hear you
Yes.
better?
I've been living for 4 years next to a 14,000 square foot project, and it's very unsatisfactory. But my major concern is the proposed traffic flow pattern. Having exercised due diligence today, and I'm sure you all have too, you will know that there are approximately 200 houses and apartments who will be directly affected by trucks barreling down the streets, and several hundred more residents on Breakers and in China Cove, whose only egress is on Ocean Boulevard, and those on the perpendicular streets north of Seaview, for whom Seaview is the sole egress. So they will all be negatively impacted. And if the architect had shown us the streets, you would see that almost everyone, with very, very few exceptions, who lives in Corona del Mar, west of Marguerite, will suffer aggravation, noise, inconvenience. It's not just the noise, the dirt, the excessive pollution, traffic congestion, damage to city streets, and that the egress and return from individual properties will be difficult and sometimes dangerous. The quality of life for an entire community will be diminished, and I can speak to that directly from the last 4 years. It won't affect us just for the excavation period, because it will continue for the several years on as heavy construction equipment is moved in and out on a daily basis, and our beautiful community becomes more and more industrial strength, and I don't believe anybody wants that. We have a lovely community, and I love it. I love living in Corona del Mar, and I do hope that you will preserve what we have and not make it industrial, as it's, that traffic flow is just an aggravation I can hardly stand. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Elaine Linhoff. I live in Balboa. And I just want to say that I am looking at this from another angle. All these other people have lived in Corona Del Mar. I live on the peninsula. I'm going to be affected because I look across the bay often. I not only live there, I also am a sailor in the bay. And so I look at that from across the bay. AERIE project is too big. Channel Reef is an eyesore. We have Channel Reef and we have that other one on Fernando or wherever it is that just stand out. They do not fit in with the community and we don't need any more of them. I think the AERIE project is too big. It just needs to be scaled down. The city spent a lot of time, money, and effort on creating a general plan, and I think that the City Council should adhere to the goals of the general plan. As I recall, I can't quote statement by statement, but the general plan was to retain the village atmosphere, the residential, to protect residential character, and to also protect the coastal bluffs. And I think that you should make this developer scale down his project to conform with the general plan, with the intent of the general plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Bill Varon, 212 Carnation, and I'm here to speak on behalf of AERIE. I'm in support of it because I think it's an overall improvement to the site. You can just go and look at it. You can see from everything I've heard tonight, it's even going to be safer. They're using state-of-the-art green techniques, to build it that I think will be a great model that other developers can follow. I think that's important. So especially in light of what the alternatives could be, everyone keeps talking about alternatives. For me, I've been there almost 10 years, 3 houses away and just across the street, arguably more affected than probably most in this room pertaining to views and so forth. What are the alternatives? You can see the trend line marching over the last few years right down Carnation. Big, huge boxes that are built, taking up every square inch of dirt and every square inch of air that they possibly could. And I'm having deja vu right now because this is, I've talked to you before, I've talked to the Planning Commission, and these are, I keep saying the same things over and over, so I'm going to resist the temptation to go through my top 10 reasons why I'm in support of this. But, the bottom line is, there's a handful of folks here tonight that are quite vocal. I think they're in the minority. I talked to all my neighbors, and I'm here to tell you that most of the neighbors are in support of this for all the reasons that I've stated tonight and before. As long as I have 10 more seconds, I'll throw my congratulations out for not only the marriage but the trophy behind you. Well done, and I hope that after tonight we can get a vote and I can throw some congratulations over to the Julians for an approval. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Kent Moore. I reside at 210 Carnation Avenue in Corona Del Mar. Now, when I moved into the Ocean and Carnation neighborhood some 39 years ago, there was a spirit of cooperation and friendship between the residents. And then individuals began arriving with their own personal agendas and making up their own rules, if you will, as they went along. despite being cited by the city for ongoing code violations over the years, which I've personally observed. So what did some of these residents who happen to border the AERIE project contribute to the neighborhood before and after they built their projects? The answer is nothing. Now comes Mr. Julian, who has done everything that this city has asked him. And he has created a gorgeous development in the place of the rundown apartment house that I actually lived in at one point. He is providing enhanced public views. He's providing more street parking. He's undergrounding the utilities. He's replacing lost natural foliage, to name just a few things. Now, as you all know, the costs incurred by Mr. Julian to this point have been prohibitively expensive. I mean, how much longer must this go on? Most neighbors are behind AERIE, but many of the opponents are outsiders and not property owners. And that used to mean something with city councils when they received petitions. And so I ask you that tonight that this council allow Mr. Julian to move forward, finally, with his project, the AERIE. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I give you some notes? I'm John Martin, and I live on Balboa Island. Thank you for this opportunity to express my feelings in. I sent an email today, and I apologize to you for the late hour in getting it to you. We were out of town for 2 weeks, and I have timed my presentation here, and I can get it right to the second in 3 minutes, so I will read it, so forgive me for that. What I said today was I will attend the City Council meeting this evening to again express my opposition to the AERIE project as currently designed. This has been a long and arduous process, and much has been passionately expressed both in favor of and against the project concept. Therefore, my comments will be brief and direct. I oppose the AERIE development as proposed. If it is approved tonight, I will continue in opposition, as I am convinced that the scale is too massive for the site, as well as incompatible with the predominantly small single-family detached character of a charming Corona del Mar neighborhood. It is my belief that once the public truly comprehends the scale of the project, the extent of the grading required, the size of the retaining walls, and the huge structure massing, people will be aghast and asked how it could have been approved. As Churchill once says, and I paraphrase, when a problem or a malady is seen by a few, there is usually time for the cure. When it is visible to all, it is often too late. This is the case with AERIE. Once the bluff is destroyed, with a massive cut well below the predominant line of development, and an enormous hole is there to receive huge retaining walls needed to hold up the cut slope, there will be no putting it back. I could elaborate on the risks that the developer and the city are exposing themselves to, but I don't expect to be heard on this subject. What I do know is that something is amiss when submerged land is used in the calculation to justify and generate over 60,000 square feet of structure on a small parcel in the most visible and scenic hillside location within the city. My hope is that the council will recognize that this project is the legacy it will leave and how the council will be judged in the years to come. My opinion, based on experience in the community development and home building industry for over 4 decades, is that this project is inappropriate from all aspects that I can imagine, including incompatibility with the existing neighborhood, the right scale for the site, feasibility to develop, saleability in the marketplace, and the visual impact from a public perspective. How the project got this far in the approval process continues to baffle me. However, if this project is approved tonight and development is to proceed, I urge the city to protect itself and the adjacent property owners with a completion bond for the entire structure. No one would want to see the prominent AERIE location in a partially graded state or with a half-completed structure because of cost overruns, slope failures, lack of sales, or other contingencies that would delay or, worse yet, halt completion. At an appropriate scale, I would enthusiastically support this project. In my opinion, the developer would be far better off to reduce the size to 35,000 to 45,000 square feet, which I believe would not only be right for the site
It would result in a more successful project in all dimensions and for all concerned. The diagrams that I sent you speak for themselves, and I was sorry to send this an email and be here at the last moment. I have a lecture tomorrow morning early on responsible community development, and I will have to leave early, but my wife will be here and will continue in our protest against this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Bud Rasner, 2500 Ocean Boulevard, the corner of Ocean and Carnation. 37-year resident and business owner in Corona Del Mar. My topic is specific and new information and brief. Alternate A, we're talking about alternatives. I homed in alternate A. It's not superior to the proposed development. The EIR is expected to find an alternative, and it's something that this council knows better about, but then it comes down to credentials once again. That's the reason the last speaker. The street view and water view may even be adversely affected negatively with alternatives. Legally maybe, but by alternative A, it will be negative. Necessary appurtenances are allowed above the structure height if necessary with the undergrounding of a mechanical and storage areas of the proposed plan. It's important to that plan. If they are not put, the mechanical isn't somewhere, it's going to be hanging on the roof, and it's allowed in the name of appurtenances. And on the outside of the building of the roof. Just as importantly, it'll provide more parking. We're always talking about parking, and this alternative A would reduce the parking for the units. Little is to be gained except from fewer truck trips, which is important. But these truck trips can only be done during the day and not in the summer months and every so many minutes and no idling and so on and so on. This major reason cited for this alternative, but it's a one-time event. It's over and forgotten, like street repairs that are mandated by the city. It has to be done. Somebody is going to develop this property. Enough restrictions and onerous conditions have been placed on Mr. Julian. To devalue his project to just appease to get some internal, something internal and feeling seems unfair. Let's get this thing done. Thank you for your volunteerism and also your regard for property rights.
Thank you. Okay, any other speakers?
My name is Bill McCaffrey. I live at Channel Reef. I've lived there for 23 years. I'm very much in favor of the AERIE project. I think it's got a number of first-class elements to it. I believe the project itself is a first-class project for many of the reasons that have been cited by the applicant and the architect and others. I think it's going to be a big improvement to the neighborhood and long overdue. The developer himself is a first-class developer. He's gone out of his way to be a good neighbor even before any construction. He's been very communicative to all of the neighbors, inviting them to view the project and coming to make presentations. He has a first-class architect who is deeply caring of this community. I don't think he would build anything that would be egregious in any way. And the projects I've seen here that he's been involved with, I don't think anybody could be embarrassed with. As you know, the project's been to the Planning Commission 3 times, and they obviously investigated every aspect of this in quite a bit of detail, and all 3 times they voted 6-1 in favor of recommending it. So I think that for all these reasons, we've got an opportunity to approve a first-class project. We won't have to worry about the process. I think it's all been very well thought out and will be very well implemented. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. Congratulations, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Jan.
Jan Vandersloot of Newport Heights, representing myself and citizens group SPAWN. SPAWN toured the SPAWN Steering Committee, many members of the SPAWN Steering Committee toured the site about a week ago. And after listening to the developer, he was very generous and kind in showing us this project. We remain in opposition to the project as basically being too big, too massive, too much excavation of the bluff, not conforming to the general plan policy of minimizing alteration of the natural landform. One of the things I've been concerned about is some of the biologic impacts of the dock, and I'm presenting to you this pictures showing the little rock island that's out there in the middle of the cove. And one of the slides that Brian Jeanette showed, the eelgrass and sand dollar exhibit, showed how close this new dock is going to get to this landform. And what my question is this new dock going to impact the biological value of this habitat? This habitat is actually environmentally sensitive habitat for the endangered brown pelican. I think the EIR is deficient in not analyzing the impacts to what the dock is going to do to that marine environment. Another issue I wanted to bring up was the issue of the described wetlands on the bluff, where they have wetland vegetation described on the bluff, but it's dismissed as being a wetland because it doesn't meet the 3-parameter definition of wetlands. And I'd like to reiterate that the Coastal Commission just a couple of months ago reaffirmed the 1-parameter definition of wetlands in a wetland in Huntington Beach owned by the Mills Land and Water Company. And the consultant for this project, the wetlands consultant for this project, Tony Baumkamp, who is here tonight, argued in front of the Coastal Commission that the wetlands did not exist in Huntington Beach because it only had 1 parameter and not the 3 parameters. The Coastal Commission rebuffed that argument unanimously. They were unanimous. There wasn't any doubt about it, that the definition of wetlands in the Coastal Act is a 1-parameter definition and not a 3-parameter definition. And since this, since EIR described a wetland area on the bluff with 1-parameter definition, I think you need to consider that. And I think the EIR does not adequately recognize it and does not mitigate for it. So I think that's something you ought to consider.
Okay, can you wrap it up, Jan?
The last thing I wanted to mention was there is a violation, a notice of violation for this property for vegetation removal, and I think that that violation ought to be corrected before you approve any development on this property.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, any other speakers?
Good evening, council members. This is my lovely assistant, David Cord. He's going to be able to hold some things while I speak. Please, I'll try and stay in time. First, I would like to say that the apartments and house that make up the AERIE property have been occupied for at least 4 or more years, with the house being occupied even longer. We live adjacent to the
Could
project
you
site.
state your name, Lisa?
Oh, Lisa Vallejo. Hi. So I know you guys. We live adjacent to the project site, and we regularly see the same people and the same vehicles residing there, including overnight. Second, I'd like to rebut, again, Mr. Jeanette's incorrect assessment that Coastal Bluff properties are now all allowed to have basements. Coastal Bluffs are protected landforms per multiple CLUP policies, and you can't fluff over issues like this. They are significant. And he is not deciphering between Ocean Boulevard or Shore Cliffs or Cameo Shores and Carnation Bluff. There's a difference between those types of bluffs, and you just cannot lump them all in together and say everybody can have a basement. Excuse me. And also, Mr. Miles was not concerned about the destruction of the stability of the bluff, a sliver of bluff face facade that may be left if this project is approved. He was concerned about the Monterey land formation that is there. Okay. When this project first came up and we didn't know much about city politics, we unfortunately have learned a lot, and we've seen this city
I'm going to just say this, we believe being railroaded and feeling obligated to somehow move this project forward in the process, and that the policies have been wordsmithed to the point where now the CLUP policies are now interpreted as meaningless. So it's just unfortunate. 2 years ago, you were here, the majority of you did the right thing. You told the applicant the project was too big for this protected coastal bluff. At the time, Mayor Rosansky said it was not the direction the city is going in, and that if the applicant decided to continue with his project, he would expect to see a greatly changed project. You gave him the build-to line of 50.7 above sea level, similar to other properties on Carnation. They are still proposing to excavate to the same level as 2 years ago. Nothing's changed, and now there's going to be a hole in the bluff at 40.5, which I don't think the Coastal Commission will approve of that bat cave entrance out to the marina and the pool. They're slightly reduced in size from a whopping 74,000 square feet. The project is still 62,207 on a 61,000 square foot lot with 6 stories. It is still grossly oversized. It is actually bigger than the Aaron Spelling Mansion in Los Angeles, which is the largest home in LA County, and that is 56,500 square feet with 123 rooms, and it's on 6 acres, not a 61,000 square foot bluff. I mean, that's why they need the car elevators. As you know, this site is so constrained to put a 6-story building there that makes up this amount of footage. I'm not telling you anything new.
Okay, can you wrap it up?
Okay, please, as far as the marina, we were at that Harbor Commission meeting. Those harbor commissioners voted against recommending approval of that. They had their arm bent by the city attorney. We were there. We watched it. We have CDs of it. You listened to it. That free water is being taken away from the public that do use that area. And people of Corona del Mar will notice this project, and we ask that you please do what's reasonable and look at alternatives that will minimize all of these impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other speakers? How many more people want to speak? Raise your hand. Okay, I guess you're it.
Mr. Mayor and council members, thank you. I'm Pat Parsons. I'm a clinical psychologist practicing in Newport, and I've lived in Corona del Mar for the past 29 years, the last 12 of which have been at the Channel Reef building. You may recall that I've been here a couple of times, and I'd like to give you copies of what will be a very brief statement, I promise. I appeared before the council last year and submitted a petition signed by a majority of Channel Reef residents indicating their strong opposition to the AERIE project for a number of reasons. Subsequent to that meeting, I presented another petition to the Harbor Commission signed by an even greater number of residents, which opposed the project's plan to include a marina to house huge yachts. Last month, I attended a board meeting at Channel Reef where the developer and architect of the project made a presentation which included renderings of the building and dock. Several board members and residents expressed concerns about the impact on the bluff and the harbor. Speaking only for myself here, I want to say that the sheer size of the building shown in the renderings, as well as the exterior design, looked like it would be more at home in Dubai than Corona del Mar. The bottom line is, it's my sincere hope that the council will not allow this gargantuan project to overwhelm Carnation Street, the mouth of the harbor, and all of the people who love that area. Thank you.
Thank you.
I raised my hand. My name is Keith Dawson. I'm a resident of Corona del Mar since 1971. I am a proponent of this project. I have been from the start. I've been to virtually every meeting. As I look around tonight, I see a lot of people with green stickers on that haven't been to any of these hearings. And I don't know where these folks come from, except that they were rounded up. And I can appreciate that because there's some value in numbers. But you've heard from a lot of attorneys tonight, and I hate to admit that I'm also an attorney. I consider myself a recovering attorney. But one thing I learned as an attorney, and I've been doing that for over 30 years, is that when a client comes into my office who's gone through 2 other attorneys and says, I want you to take my case, and I believe Mr. Miles is the 3rd attorney that's appeared at these meetings on behalf of the opponents, I try and back away politely but definitely from that client, because I also learned during the course of my career that if I tell a client information or I give him advice that he doesn't like, he just can find another attorney. I mean, he's going to find an attorney that will agree with him. And that's what I see going on here. This project has gone through the ringer. I can't imagine why the applicant is stuck with this. I would have thrown up my arms and my hands long ago and tried to flip the property to get out of it, because these, Mr. Julian and his wife have gone through, they've done everything that the council and the planning commission has asked them to do. This project is a very unique piece of property. Every piece of property is unique in and of itself, but this property presents specific design problems, which you folks have worked very hard to tackle, long and hard, the planning commission as well. You've come up with a solution. Mr. Julian has complied with everything that you've asked him to do. And I think it's time for, I think it was Rodney King during the Watts riots that said, can't we all just get along here? I think it's time we move on. The city manager said in the invocation the word change and how it causes people to react. And I think that's all that's going on here. This is a different project. It's unique. And it is a change. But change is not always bad. It's good. And this project, it will be a good thing for Corona Del Mar. And frankly, when this project is approved, and I'm certain it will be, I'm going to be proud, even though I took a very small part in the process, to be a part of it. I'll look up at that project from the Bay and say, I took a small part in making that happen. So I hope you approve it, and I hope you do it tonight and not fall for the last-minute tactics of dumping all this information on you folks that you don't have time to review. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other speakers? You've already had your turn, Kathleen. Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public testimony and bring it back to, I'm sorry, give the applicant a chance to rebut here.
I wear this green
Can you
sticker.
state your name, please?
My name is Lori Leggio. I've been in Newport Beach for 32 years. I share a listing on Carnation at 239, which is my aunt and uncle's. And I feel very saddened that everybody's attacking everybody here. What we're trying to do is not remove the mountain. And the biggest part is our coastal area in the rock. And when you start digging into that rock, and God forbid there's an earthquake, we're going to have more problems. It's like a piece of paper that tears, and it'll keep tearing into it. So please consider not such a massive home, but a home for these people, or a condo, or whatever they shall like, but not of its significance. It's too big, and it's going to be too invasive into our mountain. And you have to understand, you've got rock there, you guys. You start moving it, you're going to have problems. Our city cannot afford a lawsuit. Thank you.
Okay, applicant.
Good evening, Mayor Selich, members of the council. My name is Tim Paone, and unfortunately, I too am an attorney.
A lot of confessing here tonight.
Yes.
But are you recovering?
Bless me, Father. I probably have not yet recovered, so I apologize in advance. I want to start off by saying that our team fully respects all the views and concerns expressed by the neighborhood. And I think those of you who've seen how Mr. Julian has conducted himself through this entire process knows that he's been open to listening. He's made changes over the course of time. And hopefully nothing would be misunderstood to suggest that we have anything other than respectful disagreement with those who've spoken to you. However, if I thought this was being railroaded through the city, I wouldn't be standing here now because we have obviously no idea what your vote's going to be. And for that reason, we need to address some of the comments that have been made tonight. Mr. Miles addressed a lot of issues. Your city attorney, I think, responded to the key ones. But I just want to point out there were a lot of adjectives, a lot of superlatives, a lot of different things, but it was very short on facts. And so please look at the facts. Much of what people have said tonight has not been addressed. In fact, virtually everything that people have said tonight has not been addressed, is addressed in detail, in great detail, in the EIR and the staff reports elsewhere. The record covers every issue that has been raised, covers it in detail. It's important to remember that this is, with the exception of the, and let me say this up front, with the exception of the 500-plus square feet, that's just a little appendage to the site. This is a multifamily site. It's one of a series of multifamily sites in this area. And that becomes very important because a lot of people are saying you shouldn't be building multifamily here. It should be consistent with the general plan. That is the general plan, multifamily. Several speakers want the project to comply with the height requirements. You've heard that a lot. So do we. It does. Nobody's looking for a variance from the height requirements. In fact, I think generally, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, generally it's 4 feet below the maximum height. It complies, so we just want to make sure everybody understands that. Mr. Martin wants compliance with the detached character of the community. So Mr. Martin doesn't want to comply with the general plan because this is a multi-family site. Mr. Julian bought this property as a multi-family site, not a single-family site. Mr. Martin wants you to get a completion bond. It's condition number 8. Mr. Martin's been at all the hearings, and it's been discussed in the past. It's there. That has been addressed. So please don't assume that these things have not been addressed or not being taken care of. Your staff's done a pretty thorough job. Your planning commission did a pretty thorough job. In our prior visits to you, you've done the same. We've talked a lot about alternatives. What's in the document, the EIR's alternatives, are the types of alternatives that CEQA requires. There's comments about them being too narrow. Let me share with you, and I didn't come with the case citation in my mind, but there's a reported decision in California where the court found that it was looking at a winery. One of the project objectives in the EIR was that they wanted to use reclaimed water for irrigation. Pretty narrow, a lot more narrow of a requirement than anything in the EIR that you're looking at tonight. And the court said if an alternative does not use reclaimed water for irrigation, then it does not meet the project objectives. So the purpose of a CEQA analysis is not to provide a wide range of different ideas. What it is, it's to address, and only to address, the significant environmental effects of the project that were identified in the EIR. In this case, that's noise. So that's what these alternatives are required to do, and that is the limit of what they should be doing. So that's why the alternatives are what they are. Mr. Vandersloot talks about the one parameter test, and I have to tell you, and Jan and I have battled 20, 30 years on these issues, and we will probably continue to disagree. But I will tell you from my experience, long experience with Coastal Commission matters, with wetlands matters, and with, all of this is documented in your record as well. It's a rebuttable presumption one parameter test, and I will state right here that were it not a rebuttable presumption, it would mean that the one parameter test that Mr. Vandersloot would like you to employ would in some cases mean there's a 25% chance that something is a wetland, a 75% chance that it's not, but you've got to call it a wetland. That's wrong. That could not be upheld in court. That's not what the Coastal Commission's position is, even though they use that term. When you dig down into it, when you get involved with them, when you have a challenge, it's a rebuttable presumption. And in this case, the record clearly rebuts that presumption. It's all there in your record. He talks about the notice of violation and that it should be corrected before you take action. That notice of violation incorrectly states what occurred. Vegetation was not removed. There was trimming. It's grown back. But perhaps even more important, that notice of violation says, we'll deal with this issue when you get to the Coastal Commission. It doesn't say, stop, hold up, you can't do anything, we're fining you, you can't get through the city. He'll throw the letter in your face, but then ignore what it says. We'll deal with it when we get to the Coastal Commission. When we get to the Coastal Commission, everything that the commission staff was told had been removed will have grown back because, in fact, it had not been removed. An issue was made that there's people living in the building. Yep. It's in the EIR. It's in the record. We've talked about it. Everybody knows there's people living in the building. That's not a revelation. Lisa Vallejo talked about the project being railroaded. And I think to Mr. Julian, that's a particularly difficult statement to swallow. You know, this project that's being railroaded had your CLUP specifically amended to make it tougher for this project. It's called the, colloquially around, the AERIE amendment to your CLUP. It doesn't happen when you're being railroaded through. The EIR has gone to unprecedented lengths in terms of the analysis within it, particularly in the case of view simulations. Very, very expensive, very, very extensive, to make sure that your concerns were fully addressed so that when we got back in front of you, you could see view simulations from just about everywhere, including Begonia Park, including from the kayaking level, including from just about every important vantage point there is. Nobody, to my knowledge, to knowledge of anyone I've talked to, has ever gone to that length. Similarly, the noise analysis has done the same thing, all at tremendous expense to Mr. Julian. The mitigated negative deck was redone several times. Should have been. We agree. We're not arguing that, but it was. If this project was being railroaded, it wouldn't have been. I think it's important that those who are watching on TV, listening at home, who may read about it in this paper, understand that this project has been anything but railroaded. What's gone on here is a great example, a tough example for Mr. Julian, but a due process and a city that wants to do it right. And has put a great deal of pressure on him to do a proper environmental review, to make adjustments to the project, to respond to the community, and he has done that. He has tremendous support within this community for the project, and yes, there are those who object, and again, we respect and understand their views. But more than anything, we want to make sure that the record is clear to this community that the objections and a lot of the statements made tonight simply are not true, are not false, and are not at all representative of a process that started in August of 2005 when he first submitted his application. Nothing's being railroaded. We respect your attention to this, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Payon.
Mr. Mayor, I'll try to keep this quick. My name is Brian Jeanette. I'm the architect. And one of the gentlemen mentioned the fact that we had a myriad of variances, which, again, as Tim stated, there are no variances. We are below the height limits. The development down the bluff was established by the council. It was based upon an evaluation of the buildings that surround the site. We didn't go any deeper than that. In fact, we went higher than that. So this is what your directions were to us. 18% of the site is submerged, not 60% and not 50%, 18%. And that was factored into the calculation of the number of units as the zoning code requires us to do. The coastal bluff is being protected and, in fact, is being enhanced substantially better than what we see there today. The migratory marine birds were addressed, the pelicans were addressed in the EIR, and if there's any question on it, they should refer to that for information. The pier headline, as Commissioner Gardner had some questions on, in my original briefing book that I sent to council, from page 50 to 58, it actually identifies the pier headline, the bulkhead line, and where within the bay the city has allowed substantial encroachments beyond that. Docks can be up to the pier headline with the boat side tide, which happens throughout the bay all over. In fact, your marine, sorry, I don't remember your title, Chris, but Chris Miller is here that could expound on that, I'm sure, if you had some questions. And our expert consultant, Tony Baumkamp, is here to address any concerns that you may have, not from a legal standpoint, but from a biological standpoint, about the growth of the eelgrass and how we are protecting it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to council for discussion. Before the council gets into discussing it, I just have a couple of questions for the staff regarding the EIR, which is an informational document. It's not an approval document. By my count, through all this testimony this evening, we only had 5 issues that were brought forth to challenge the adequacy of the EIR. The 3 that Mr. Miles brought up, the coastal bluffs, the greenhouse gases, and the way the alternatives were treated, and then Mr. Vandersloot's claim that the EIR did not adequately address the damage that the dock may do to the marine environment, and the issue on the wetlands on the bluff and the 1 parameter issues. Some of these were mentioned by Mr. Payon in his rebuttal, but I'd like the staff to put it on the record that these issues have been adequately addressed in the EIR or not.
Mr. Mayor, yes, we do believe they've adequately been addressed in the record with the EIR. We can have some of the consultants here in the room address those issues. I think we have Mr. Baumkamp is here on the wetlands issue. And if you want to go back through those 5, maybe I can point to those areas, but we do believe.
Well, I don't think you have to. I don't think you have to go through them all. But was there any substantial testimony brought up this evening that would change any of the opinions that were
none that I heard.
To? Okay. All right. With that, I'll open it up for council discussion. Who wants to go first? Nancy?
I don't want to go first. This has been not a pleasant experience. It's been a very difficult one. I have 2 piles of letters like this. These are the pros and these are the cons. They weigh the same. They're both full of thoughtful comments. I don't put a lot of credence in petitions per se. I mean, I got petitions from one side, I got petitions from another. It's easy to sign a petition, but when people take the time to write or to call and discuss an issue, I mean, that means something. And as I say, on both sides I received very thoughtful comments that would send me back to the documents again and reading. There is a great deal to like about this project. I've always liked the architecture. This doesn't matter, that's irrelevant, but still I think it's a very attractive building. We get to improve views. It's green. That's great. At the same time, I have just huge concerns about about the whole cove and the impact of such a large dock. I have concerns about the impact of the traffic. I don't think it's insignificant. I mean, frankly, that's a lot of people listening to a lot of trucks for a long time for a project to be built. I'm not a visual person. It's hard for me to look at a building and say, oh, this is too big, this is too small, until suddenly it's there, and then I go, oh my God, that was too big, or it's fine. But I've had a number of comments from people whose judgment I do respect suggest, on the one hand, it's great, it's the best thing since sliced bread, and the other, it's way too big, it's going to dominate and destroy that whole area. And from what the city attorney says, it's difficult to refute these things because they are in the EIR, and we don't necessarily have the science, even though maybe our common sense says, well, that's not right. It doesn't seem to be right. It's also difficult because the proponent gets to establish the objectives. And how do you not meet the objectives? The only way you can meet your objectives is by doing the proposed project. I mean, what's the first objective? To develop a state-of-the-art multifamily residential condominium project with a sufficient number and size of units to justify the incorporation of everything else. There's only one that does that. And that's what the applicant proposes. So it becomes very difficult when you have an instinct that says, I'm not sure that this does meet the general plan. Our general plan creates guidelines that preserve the charm and beauty of our residential neighborhoods, provides a vision and framework for development that reflects the aspirations of the community, establishes a basis for judging whether specific development proposals are in harmony with general plan policies and standards, and allows private developers to design projects that will enhance the character of the community. what does character of the community mean? And that's not an idle question. I mean, I know that those of you who are proponents know what it means, and those of you who are against it know exactly what it means. And I can tell you, as someone who was very close to the general plan process, we didn't know what it meant. We knew that it was something that divided the community right down the middle, and so we made squishy language. So again, it's very difficult. It becomes a very personal thing. Did we go by 40 years ago? I mean, I was born and raised in Corona del Mar, so I know what my vision of it is, and it's changed a great deal. If we go by the last 10 years, the last 10 years is you build as big as you can to the maximum, and if it's not enough, you go underground. Is that what's enhancing the charm of the neighborhood? This is really a tough one. But I guess I come down because of, particularly of my concerns about the harbor and everything, that I would say that I think we would be better off with a smaller project and one of the alternatives.
Okay. Who's next? Councilman Henn.
You know, since the last time we saw this, it strikes me that the applicant has complied with all of the guidance that was given the last time we were here, and then some, as well as having gone through an environmental review process. When you look at the whole of the record since 2005, has to be, well, as far as I know anyway, the most extensive EIR process for a project relative to a size like this that I can imagine and that I'm aware of in this city, and including now the construction of a full EIR. Those that would like to see 3 single-family homes on this site have to consider the fact that this is a multi-family site. It is entitled to be built with multi-family development, and that is consistent with the general plan. The concern about the bluffs is a difficult one, I have to admit. And the problem is that we have a general plan document that contains hundreds, maybe thousands of statements of one stripe or another that represent value judgments expressed in the plan. And this isn't the first time that we have seen general plan statements that are internally in conflict, or at least potentially internally in conflict. And so it is hard, but it seems to me that there is a reasonable interpretation of the general plan that is consistent with this project. And I think the applicant is entitled to have the benefit of that judgment. And so for those reasons, I will be in support of this.
Okay. Councilman Daigle?
I think, as Mr. Beek said, there's no rule against excavation, and I think it's part of this project is really also the direction of the city and people using that strategy where they are trying to get square footage, usable square footage underground while reducing the mass above ground. And with this particular project, it's about 1/3 of the square footage is going to be undergrounding, so it's probably something that we're going to be seeing more of in this community, and really something that people seem to desire. With regards to the docks, you know, certainly I understand they're a cash flow generator of the project, but it does raise questions about the development of private marinas and how all that works. And I think moving forward, the Harbor Resources Manager will look at it, and if council wants to look at that more closely, we will have that opportunity. At the first hearing of the City Council, you know, myself and 3 others decided that it was too far down the bluff, and we asked that it be pulled back. So there were instructions and direction given to the applicant. So this isn't the project in its original form, and so it was actually pulled up substantially. At the last hearing, I spoke out against the environmental process. I didn't think it was adequate, and that there was credible evidence of impact, particularly with noise and concern about the trucks and the geology. And since that time, there's been an environmental impact. So I think the council has made an effort to really to be responsible, and really I would think the developer would say probably meticulous about how we are looking at this particular project. As far as the massing goes, it took me a little bit to understand the full dimension of the project, and I think when you understand it in its full dimension, it's much different than the sort of thing of, well, it's 40,000 square foot above ground. And so I took the time and spent a couple hours at the architect's office to really understand that. And I think that's a very important aspect of the project. So I will be supporting the project, and I will be keeping an eye on those docks, and I kind of share your concerns about that.
Thank you. Councilman Rosansky?
Sure, I'll go next. I'll be supporting Councilwoman Gardner's comments, I guess, at the end of the day. I really want to like this project. I've wanted to like it ever since I've heard about it. I like Mr. Julian. I think he has good intentions. I think he's tried to work with his neighbors to bring about a situation that was better for them. But at the end of the day, my heart says that this is not the right project for this site. It's too big. I think I said that the last time when we talked about this a year ago. Too much of a good thing. I think that's the term that I used. It's just you're cramming a lot into a very small site. I don't think that the project is consistent with our general plan objectives. I don't think it's consistent with the character of the neighborhood, and I will be not supporting the project. I think part of the problem here is not so much that someone used the term railroaded through. Clearly, this project was not railroaded through. I mean, a project that's lasted 4 years in our process, and I'm sure Mr. Julian was working on this well before he got to the city, has not been railroaded through. I think the problem is, and it's not just with Mr. Julian, I think it's a lot of times we get developers that come to us, and they have big ambitions, and sometimes the city's just not willing to just say up front, this is not going to work. You need to go back and rethink it. They say, well, you can submit it if you want, we'll look at it. And that's what he did. He submitted his project, we looked at it, and we looked at it again, and we looked at it again and again and again. I mean, obviously, they had a list here of 10 or 12 times that they've been in front of committees or commissions or other groups looking at this project. And to me, it says that if you got to look at a project that much, it's just not the right project. So I unfortunately cannot support it. I encourage him, assuming if it doesn't pass tonight, to think about redesigning it into a smaller project that fits more in the context of the Corona Del Mar neighborhood. Thank you.
Councilman Webb.
I guess that one of the exhibits that kind of crystallized what I was looking at as far as how large this is and how it fits or doesn't fit into the bluffs was the comparison where you take the view of the McIntosh house and you move it over and you set it on top of this site. And yes, the McIntosh house is 1/3 the size from a square footage standpoint, but it has a huge frontage on the bay. One of the views that isn't shown, that was shown in some of the previous hearings, was when you look at it from the west, and I guess you would say like when you were coming from the Harbor Patrol, you can see a whole series of houses that are built on the bluff that are, yes, they're separate, they tie together, they look like they're all the same. So I don't feel that this is out of character for what is built on the bluffs themselves. I'm not concerned at all about the dock space. I think that the Harbor Commission, when they reviewed it and looked again at the project area, the pierhead line, and the bulkhead lines, that they showed that these are not encroaching in the navigable areas that are regularly used. As a Lido 14 sailor, yes, I used every inch of the width of the channel. You get out, you try to make sure you didn't tack right where your centerboard was going to hit ground, but you used the whole width. So small boat sailors are going to use that area, but I don't think it's one where you have your larger boat areas. I think that the development will be an addition to the area. I don't feel it's out of character, and so I'm going to be supporting it.
Okay. Interesting, Councilwoman Gardner. You like the architecture and are going to be opposing it. I can't say that I'm a fan of it, but I'm going to be supporting the project. I'm not sure exactly what that means. And I'm supporting it. I think Councilman Webb articulated some of my thoughts on the scale and the mass of the building. I think that those view simulations that he referred to pretty much say it all. The amount of excavation behind the bluff is not a concern to me. I think that we have many examples of that occurring. In fact, I lived right next to one in Cameo Shores when the Portobello House was being constructed, which it's an interesting comparison because in that situation, they excavated 23,000 cubic yards out to build that home, and we're excavating 25,000 here. And I can tell all of you that are concerned about noise, truck traffic, that your concerns are unfounded. I lived 60 feet away from the hole that was being constructed there, and the impacts of that truck traffic was no more than any other construction noise that you get. In fact, I found the buzzing of some of the saws and other standard construction noise more irritating than the trucks going in and out, taking the dirt out of there. It was not, and I don't particularly agree with the finding of that it's an unmitigable impact in the environmental impact report, although I guess I'm not an expert, so my opinion doesn't count in that regard, but I found it no more bothersome than just any standard construction noise that you have. And there's certainly one example of excavating the bluffs, behind the bluffs. As far as the docks go, I agree with Councilmember Webb that those docks are not a hazard to navigation. From my reading of our harbor codes, they're completely in conformance with all of our harbor codes and the standards that we have there, so I'm not bothered by the bluff or by the dock issue. So I guess with that, and I guess I just want to say one other thing, that this project has been going on for 4 years now, and the project applicant has worked to comply with everything that this council has requested, has worked very diligently with our planning commission, and I don't think that we could have asked for a more cooperative applicant in trying to redesign and conform his project to the guidance that the city was giving him. So for those reasons, I will be supporting the project also. So with that, I would entertain a motion for approval per the action in the staff report.
I'll make the motions related to the recommended actions.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Mr. City Attorney, will that action suffice for this evening?
That action suffices.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, please vote.
With council members Rosansky and Gardner voting no and Mayor Pro Tem Curry absent, the motion carries.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. Let the room clear out. Folks, hey, can I have everyone's attention? Could you clear the room, please, those that aren't staying for the rest of the meeting? And go outside. Don't stay inside the building. Okay, I'll call the meeting back to order. Okay, next item is oral reports from the City Council on committee activities. Councilwoman Daigle.
I have none.
Councilwoman Gardner.
Well, I know nobody wants one, but Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee, we had a couple of really interesting reports. One is on the opportunity to reestablish native oysters in the bay, and so they're looking for grant money to do that. And the other was a product called Aquafied, which is an inexpensive way of improving the absorption of water and the reduction of salts, and it's quite inexpensive, so I'm hoping it's being used on golf courses and parks and everything. It's not that experimental. I'm hoping that between our utilities and general services department, they can look into that and see if it might be worthwhile in some of our parks that don't use recycled water.
Hey, could we have non-native oysters in the bay so that when we want to dredge them up, no one will object?
We already have.
Okay.
We already have both.
Well, let's establish those.
We already have native oysters and non-native oysters.
Oh, okay.
They're competing with each other.
They're competing. Who's winning?
Councilman Head.
We're not sure yet.
It's cowboys and Indians, so to speak. But with regard to committee reports, just one quick one regarding group homes. We finally, ultimately, went down to defeat on Senate Bill 268, the Harmon bill, for what I consider to have very reasonable requirements for the approval of group homes licenses. We made it all the way through the Senate and went down in the Assembly. So I'm sure we're not done. We'll keep at it. We're going to try some more. We'll eventually get some regulations out of Sacramento that are sensible. With regard to use permit hearings and whatnot, you know, I had a little score sheet here somewhere. Now, this place, there it is. Just to give a sense, you know, I know we rattle on about this, or I do anyway, at most every council meeting, but I want to give the public a sense of the fact that we are very much working our way through this process. We're certainly not there yet. But we have no use permit hearings remaining. We've got maybe one or two reasonable accommodation hearings to prosecute. We've got a few city council appeals. We have 3 lawsuits, but our city attorney is on the job there. So, and we do have a half a dozen housing and urban development complaints. So there's still plenty to keep us busy here for a while, but when I turn around and look down the road that we've already traveled, I see we've traveled quite a long ways. And so I do look forward to getting to the end of this process, and I hope that's not too far into the distance. Thanks.
Councilman Rosansky?
Nothing, thank you.
Okay. And I have nothing. Okay, so move on to the next public hearing, which is item 24, the Coastal Land Use Plan update.
Jim Campbell again.
Mayor and members of the council, what this is we're bringing back to the city council the changes that the Coastal Commission incorporated with our Coastal Land Use Plan amendment. That amendment was adopted in 2007, went to the Coastal Commission, was finally approved in February of this year, had 50 modifications. And in your report, I've noted that some of those are actual land use changes. 11 areas here on the peninsula and various areas are listed there for you. We can go through any of those if you want to. Those were changes that they wanted to do to make the findings of consistency with the Coastal Act. There were other 39 changes, predominantly a few of them just typographical errors and a few minor policy changes. I noted a few in the staff report that I felt were noteworthy, related to lower cost accommodations and mitigation for the loss of that, as well as restrictions on future timeshare projects. The only other noteworthy change I didn't include in the report is that we do need to study alternative transportation on the peninsula, so we do need to provide a study evaluating whether or not a shuttle is feasible. With that, that's pretty much all I've got for you, but I can go through any of the changes specifically if you have any questions.
Councilman Gardner?
I just wanted to thank you personally. I mean, I know staff worked very hard, but you indeed worked very diligently with the Coastal Commission to narrow the number of differences we had, and you did more than a yeoman's job on this, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thankless job. Hard.
Difficult, yes.
Okay, any other questions, Mr. Campbell?
I move we adopt the recommended action related to adoption
Okay, anybody from the public wish to comment? Seeing no one, please vote.
Motion carries.
Okay, public comments on non-agenda items. Anyone want to make a public comment? Seeing no one, we'll move to current business, designation of voting delegates for the 2009 League Annual Conference. I didn't see any names in the staff report. So is that deliberate or what?
I nominate Keith Curry.
I second the nomination.
That's not fair. That's not fair. I mean,
Who said anything
does
about
anybody
fair?
want to go?
Well, I've gone like the last 11 years. So.
Well, it sounds like you are our recognized delegate then.
Are you going?
There's no term limits on this.
I'll tell you what, I will go volunteer as an alternate, so if you can't go, I'll go.
All right, fair enough.
Okay, well, I'll entertain a motion for Councilwoman Daigle.
Move the action. Second.
Anybody want to comment? Seeing no one, please vote.
Vote, please.
Is that an all-expense-paid
Councilmember
junket, or?
Webb?
Oh, cool.
please.
There you go.
Motion carries.
Okay, next item is initiation of the general plan amendment related to coastal land use plan amendment, which we just adopted. Yeah, now we have to amend the general plan to conform to that.
Well, you've made a fine presentation for me. Yes, we do need to initiate the general plan amendment. It obviously doesn't hold us to that, but we'll bring this amendment back with council, planning commission, to council. We do need to do environmental review for it as well. Bring it back at a later date, so it's just the initiation phase.
Move to adopt a resolution initiating an amendment to the general plan to change land use designation.
Second.
Second.
Okay, anybody want to comment? Seeing none, please vote. Okay.
Motion carries.
Item 27, appointment of Councilmember Nancy Gardner to the League of California Cities Coastal Cities Issues Group, the CJIG.
Second.
Okay, anybody from the public want to comment? Seeing none, please vote.
Motion carries.
Madam Clerk?
Motion for reconsideration, a motion to reconsider the vote on any action taken by the City Council at either this meeting or the previous meeting may be made only by one of the council members who voted with the prevailing side.
Okay, any motions for reconsideration? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Too bad we can't do